Chapter 260. According to his wife, Cheng Cheng was not good with words, but his writing was sharp and he was good at scolding people. She thought about it. The scene of Cheng Cheng holding a book in one hand and a pen in the other appeared in his mind. The scene was so beautiful that he didn't dare to think about it. He was afraid that he would laugh in front of Cheng Cheng. She entertained Cheng Cheng and his wife. He asked people to prepare food and hot water for them. Although the conditions were simple, they were considerate. Jiang Pengji took the guards to bury the bodies of the guards. After all, they died protecting Cheng Cheng and his wife. When they came back, they brought back a lot of carriages. She couldn't help but be curious when she saw the marks of the wheels in the ground. Cheng Cheng's life was no longer in danger. He was overjoyed when he saw that Jiang Pengji sent the carriages back. Regardless of the others, he went straight into the carriage and opened the boxes one after another. He was relieved to see that the treasures were safe. Cheng Cheng's wife smiled and joked, "It's time for you to change your temper. Otherwise, Lu County Chief and Lanting will laugh at you. No one will pick up these boxes if you throw them on the road, but you treat them as your lifeblood. People who don't know better will think that they are treasures." Cheng Cheng was a little embarrassed. He blushed because of his wife's teasing. After all, it was a little crazy to bring a few carriages of bamboo slips with him. She helped Cheng Cheng out of the predicament. He knew how difficult it was to study nowadays. The bamboo slips in the carriages were not as important as one tael of gold for ordinary people. They were just a pile of bamboo slips for starting a fire. But for those who had foresight, they were priceless. It was hard to find one of them even with money. Cheng Cheng secretly smiled at his wife. There was a hint of pride on his face, which made people who saw him smile. Because Cheng Cheng was injured, he could not withstand any additional torment. In addition, the condition of the road was not smooth, so she made the decision to prepare a carriage for the couple. The shock absorption system of the Lu's carriage belonged to the pyramid in this era. Cheng Cheng and his wife didn't know the reason at first. They didn't know Xi's kindness until they got in the carriage. Privately, Cheng Cheng's wife changed the dressing on her husband's wound. She inadvertently talked about the bandits during the day. "Did you think of someone, my husband?" Cheng Cheng's face was gloomy, and he said with disappointment, "Alas, if I had to say who I offended today, it could only be that person, that person." Madame Cheng's eyes darted around as if trying to guess who that person was. "Meng Zhan from Zhangzhou." Cheng Cheng said hesitantly, "But I don't think Meng Zhan lives up to his name, but I don't think he's that vicious. He just heard some scandals. Why would he want to kill me?" If Meng Zhan really wanted to kill him because of the scandal of exchanging a concubine for a legitimate wife, he wouldn't have left Zhangzhou. Why would he wait a few months before settling the score? Some scandals? What scandal is it? Mrs. Cheng was confused. "My husband is not a talkative person." Looking at the wounds on her husband's body, how could she not feel distressed? If she knew who was behind this, she would definitely not let them off easily. Didn't Meng Zhan lose his second son a while ago? On the surface, it is said that he is the son of his first wife, but in reality, he might be the son of a concubine. Cheng Cheng did not hide anything from his wife. If it weren't for what happened today, he wouldn't have told anyone about it. Gossiping about other people's affairs was not what a gentleman would do. Mrs. Cheng was surprised. She didn't expect it to be like this. In today's era, there was a clear distinction between the legitimate wife and the concubine. Messing up the legitimate wife and the concubine could be said to be a minor offense, or even a minor offense could be said to have violated the law. The whole family would be despised and would never be able to lift their heads again. For a noble family like the Mengs, the higher the status, the more attention they would receive. Naturally, the consequences would be more serious if the scandal was exposed. It seemed that it was not impossible for Meng Zhan to hire a killer. However, Mrs. Cheng had the same opinion as Cheng Cheng. She thought the possibility of Meng Zhan being the killer was very low. Think about it. Maybe it was someone else. Cheng Cheng let out a long sigh. He racked his brains but still couldn't figure it out. He had to put it aside for now. They had planned to separate at the nearest station, but Cheng Cheng and Lu Shi had a similar temperament. They chatted happily. Under Lu Shi's enthusiastic invitation, the two families decided to go on the road together. It was a win-win situation, and it also saved Cheng Cheng and his wife some embarrassment. If they sent a letter to their family at the station, it would take at least a month for the family to send someone over. Lanting, are you interested in these books? Although they were on the road and the conditions were simple, Cheng Cheng's injury had been healed after a period of rest. The 6 Arts of a Gentleman was a compulsory course for scholars. Cheng Cheng naturally knew how to ride and shoot. After his injury was healed, he didn't want to stay in the carriage anymore, so he decided to ride a horse to get some fresh air. He found Jiang Pengji was staring at his bookcase, so he couldn't help but ask. Yes, I found that Uncle Cheng has more books than my father's study. In that era, the books were basically in the hands of the noble families. The richer the family was, the more books they had. According to her understanding, Cheng Cheng was not a direct descendant of the Cheng family, but the tens of thousands of books in the carriage all belonged to him. She couldn't help but gasp in admiration. She didn't know where Cheng Cheng had gotten so many books. If possible, Jiang Pengji would like to make a copy. Books were an important way to pass on human wisdom. They were indispensable if civilization wanted to move forward. Of course, if they wanted to break the monopoly of civilization by the noble families, they were more than enough. Cheng Cheng didn't know what Jiang Pengji was thinking. He couldn't help but feel proud when he heard what she said. He wasn't bragging. Even the noble families with thousands of years of history might not have some of the books in the box. A small portion of these books are from my family's collection, and the rest are the remnant pages of ancient books that I've collected. Occasionally, when I hear that some houses have rare ancient books, I'll shamelessly visit them. At this point, Cheng Cheng's words became a little more vague. From this, it could be seen that the shamelessly visit he mentioned might be the kind that came uninvited. Over time, I've accumulated so many. Cheng Cheng's wife often complained about her husband. She said that she was not the legal wife, but a concubine. The books in the box were Cheng Cheng's legal wife. Although it was a joke, it showed how much Cheng Cheng liked the books. Chapter 261. Jiang Pengji wasn't a good student who loved to study, but she respected and feared the professionals who worked in the field of education. Since ancient times, human history had experienced ups and downs, but no matter how tragic the war was, they were always able to rebuild civilization from the ruins at the fastest speed possible. The reason for this was that apart from the strong resilience of humans to survive, another reason was the protection of civilization. As long as the seed of civilization was still there, it would eventually bloom on the ruins. Jiang Pengji naturally respected and yearned for Cheng Cheng's ambition. Civilization was never exclusive to one family or one clan. It was the unique wealth of the human race. Cheng Cheng didn't think too deeply or too far, but he didn't stick to one pattern. His eyes didn't only see the present, but he also thought about the inheritance of civilization. That alone made him much better than most of the aristocratic families who cherished their treasures. Jiang Pengji thought about it and asked with a smile, "Uncle Cheng, would you be willing to lend me a few books to copy?" The aristocratic families treated books as their lifeblood. Unless they had a good relationship, they wouldn't lend them easily, let alone let others copy them. Cheng Cheng was very generous, but he was also a little childish, so he replied with a smile. "Of course you can, but you have to give me something in exchange." Cheng Cheng stroked his neatly trimmed beard and said, "Bamboo slips are easy to get wet, bulky, and not easy to preserve. Every time I find some slips eaten by insects, it hurts my heart so much. I heard that paper in Hejian County is hard to buy. If it's written on bamboo paper, it's light and easy to preserve. I heard that the workshop is your mother's dowry. Cheng Cheng's wife, who was sitting in the carriage, was so angry that she almost broke her teeth when she heard her husband's nonsense. Lanting, don't listen to his nonsense. Those treasures of his are not worth much money. Cheng Cheng's wife revealed her husband's secret and said in an angry tone, if you like any of them, just tell me. You don't have to listen to me. Cheng Cheng's face turned red and he secretly wanted to beg his wife for mercy. At least she would give him some face in front of the younger generation. Jiang Pengji couldn't help but laugh when she saw their interaction. The workshop is indeed my mother's dowry. It produces a limited amount of paper every year, and most of them are ordered to other families. If Uncle Cheng likes it, this nephew will ask the housekeeper to save a few knives for you and send them to your mansion. Hearing her words, Cheng Cheng's expression couldn't help but turn solemn as he hurriedly explained. Lanting, this is a misunderstanding. No matter how frivolous I am, I still have to maintain my dignity. How could I take advantage of a junior? Uncle's original intention was that if you took these books back and copied them, you could also make a copy for Uncle. The cost of paper and ink would be calculated according to the market price. There are more and more books, and Uncle is getting older and older. I don't know how long he can take care of them. Not to mention that bamboo slips were heavy, they were also very difficult to preserve. They had very high requirements for the environment in which they were stored. Otherwise, they would go moldy or be eaten by insects. Among these tens of thousands of bamboo slips, almost every one of them had been rebound. The reason was that they were damp and moldy, and the writing was illegible. When copying, it was inevitable to make mistakes or missing words. In order to ensure that the content of the book was good, he had to go back and forth several times, and then let his sons help him proofread it. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he would recompile it. The project was very time-consuming. Ever since the introduction of bamboo paper, he had thought of replacing the bamboo slips with paper. However, the scale of the papermaking workshop was slow to expand. The paper produced every year was almost monopolized by a few gentry families, so he couldn't order any. That was a pain in the ass. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and replied with a smile, I can't show you my handwriting. I can look at it myself, but if I show it to Uncle, won't I be displaying my slight skill in front of an expert? How about this? I will provide the ink, paper, and inkstone, and Uncle will make an extra copy for me. The ink, paper, and inkstone will be provided free of charge. Just treat it as a gift for Uncle. Cheng Cheng was speechless. He almost couldn't wrap his head around what she was saying. Before Jiang Pengji could finish her words, a sachet flew toward her head. She raised her hand and grabbed it to avoid being hit. How dare you? Uncle Cheng is such a person. How can he make such a joke? Lu Shi's face was cold. He was the one who threw the sachet. Cheng Cheng quickly stopped and teased Lu Shi. Zhongqing, why are you angry? Are you angry that your son made a bad deal? Even though Cheng Cheng didn't care much about business, he knew how expensive the bamboo paper in Hejian County was. In order to finish copying those tens of thousands of bamboo slips, the amount of bamboo paper needed was not a small amount. Of course, many of the bamboo slips were unique copies, so their value was not low. Lu Shi said, Wenfu, you misunderstood me. Bamboo paper is expensive outside, but it doesn't cost a lot to use it. This kid is stupid today. He wants to exchange some paper for Wenfu's book collection. I've never seen or heard of such a black-hearted businessman. Cheng Cheng laughed and said to Jiang Pengji, like father, like son. You have the style of your father. Lu Shi was speechless. He believed that Cheng Cheng was good at scolding people. He had just called Jiang Pengji a black-hearted profiteer, and Cheng Cheng had turned around and mocked him. Wait. Who is the father and daughter here? Seeing that Cheng Cheng and his daughter were on the same side, Lu Shi suddenly felt that he was in a bad situation. He was so tired. Cheng Cheng agreed readily to Jiang Pengji's half-joking words. Okay, nephew. As long as you give me enough bamboo paper, I'll send you a copy when I'm done. It's worth it. Jiang Pengji blushed and felt a little embarrassed. Bamboo paper was extremely expensive to outsiders, but her family knew that it was worthless. Using such a small amount of paper to exchange for tens of thousands of precious books, this business could not be more profitable. Even Jiang Pengji felt that she was somewhat shameless. But Cheng Cheng accepted it so generously, without the slightest hint of displeasure, which made her feel a lot of emotions. In fact, Cheng Cheng also felt a little embarrassed. He felt that he had taken advantage of the younger generation. He was not a selfish person. He treasured the books very much, but if someone wanted to borrow them and copy them, he would gladly agree. With just one more copy, they would be able to exchange for countless precious bamboo papers. In the future, they wouldn't have to worry about the preservation of their books. Thus, they would be able to solve their worries. It seemed that both sides had suffered a loss, but in fact, from another perspective, they had both benefited. In other words, the value of some things couldn't be measured by gold or silver. Thank you, uncle. I'll cherish it. Chapter 262. After sitting in the carriage for so long, it was rare for Lu Shi to come out and relax his stiff and sore limbs. Otherwise, his muscles would protest. In another half a day's journey, we will be able to enter the city. I haven't been here for a few years, but Shangjing is still bustling. The outside world was about to turn upside down, but the majestic Shangjing was still singing and dancing, which made Lu Shi, who was used to desolation, very uncomfortable. The imperial family of Dongqing had no other skills, but they were good at seeking pleasure and pretending to be peaceful. With such a weak and incompetent imperial family, it was no wonder that the Shangyang Palace could not be protected and was burned to the ground. Lu Shi's head hurt when he thought of the mastermind who burned down Shangyang Palace and massacred the imperial family. The mastermind was none other than Qiguan Rang, Prince Shouchang's advisor. Yes, he heard it right. It was that Qiguan Rang. A counselor of low birth, a treacherous character, ruthless methods, and a counselor whose loyalty had all been fed to dogs. Gu Min didn't know much about history. Most of what she knew was from TV dramas, so she only remembered 3 things about Qiguan Rang. First, he burned down Shangyang Palace and killed the men of Dongqing's imperial family. Second, he caused the Empress to lose 3 cities in a row. Third, he set up a trap in the prison and caused the former master's good situation to collapse instantly. He lost everything and surrendered to the Empress on the day the city opened. When everyone was pleading for mercy for their former master, hoping that the Empress would spare the life of the former master, Prince Changsho, and just imprison him. This would also show off her benevolence. The Empress asked for Qiguan Rang's opinion, but he actually insisted on beheading him and eliminating the root of the problem. He even said a very famous sentence: "A good bird chooses a tree to nest in, and a virtuous minister chooses a master to serve. Since he betrayed me, why should I care about him?" Listening to him, it was as if he had been cheated on by Prince Changsho. Others would at most whine when they were cheated on, but Qiguan Rang directly killed the old master's family. Although he didn't know why Qiguan Rang knew his daughter early, it was still a good thing. Without the help of Qiguan Rang, the timid and hesitant Prince Changsho wouldn't be able to do anything. When the sun was high in the sky, they finally saw the towering city wall. Lu Shi was lost in his thoughts. Cheng Cheng, who was riding parallel to him, used his hands to cover his eyes. Suddenly, he let out a sound of surprise and smiled faintly. "Did you see someone familiar?" Lu Shi followed Cheng Cheng's line of sight. In the distance, there was a luxurious carriage with a thin gauze draped over it. A blurry figure was sitting inside. Around the carriage stood hundreds of armored guards with long spears in their hands. In addition, there were a few young men dressed in Confucian robes with their hair crowns hanging high above their heads. Looking at the bows and quiver on the backs of the horses, it was not difficult to guess what these people were going to do next. It was likely that the noble sons of Shangjing were taking them to participate in the hunt, taking the opportunity to exchange feelings. With the assessment around the corner, this kind of activity was always particularly frequent. They seemed to be going on an outing to participate in some kind of gathering. Should Wenfu go and say hello? Cheng Cheng thought for a moment, then shook his head. There's no hurry. Let's go into the city first. Considering the situation in Shangjing, Shi asked the motorcade to move to the side to avoid colliding with people and causing unnecessary trouble. However, just because they didn't take the initiative to look for trouble didn't mean that trouble wouldn't come looking for them. Jiang Pengji started her live stream early that day. The audience in the live stream room received the news early in the morning and rushed over quickly. The room was full in an instant. Shangjing was a real ancient capital city. The degree of prosperity and extravagance wasn't something that a small rural place like Hejian County could compare with. Jiang Pengji rode on white leisurely. It looked like she was looking at the scenery, but in fact, she was chatting with the audience. Bing Tang Lemeng, #propping chin. As soon as I saw the road paved with bricks, I knew that the streamer was about to reach Shangjing. Ancient roads were mostly dirt roads or gravel roads. The former was wet when it rained, and the latter was bumpy. It was a huge project to pave a road with bricks of the same size, and it cost a lot of money. It was impossible to find such a good road if it wasn't a capital city like Shangjing or a big city with a developed economy. Tujio Xiaofan, I just want to get into the city as soon as possible. I want to see Shangyang Palace, which the streamer said was Lingshao Palace in heaven, Shangyang Palace on earth. I wonder how prosperous it is. I don't know if its scale is comparable to the Forbidden City. This is an authentic ancient palace building. Lo Siji Lianmeng, come on, Shangyang Palace is a royal palace. Ordinary people can't even get close to the palace walls, right? At most, they can see the prosperity of Shangjing. It's not possible to see the whole of Shangyang Palace. Host V, when the world is in my hands, you can see wherever you want. As soon as the words came out, the whole streaming room exploded. Streamer Zheng Shengwo, 666, do you feel the happiness of being spoiled by the domineering streamer? Inuejia Zhuge Qinma, yes. Chunlai, I'm so happy that I'm going to faint, okay? Ju Guchesti, I've already fainted. I'm so happy that I don't want to get up. I need the streamer to kiss me to get up. De Wang Sens will Lai Ponchen, that's really exciting. Streamer, do you still need fangirls to warm your bed? Nide de Yida, go away, you little demons. The streamer is obviously talking to me. Unruly people. With the audience in the streaming room joking around, the journey wasn't boring. It was even a little interesting. Jiang Pengji didn't have a good impression of streaming, but she liked some cute little angels in the streaming room. Just as the corners of her lips curled up into a faint smile, the feeling of being spied on suddenly entered her brain, which made her smile disappear. Without thinking, Jiang Pengji quickly pulled out the longbow that was placed on the back of the horse. She quickly put an arrow on the bowstring and drew the bow to a full moon. Pa! The noise made Lu Shi, who was in front of her, come to his senses. He turned his head and saw an arrow explode in the air. The remains fell to the ground. His daughter had not finished drawing the bow. Her expression was cold, and her dark eyes were filled with murderous intent. Lu Shi was about to speak. Lan, he saw his daughter draw the bow even faster. Before he finished speaking, an arrow had left the bowstring at the speed of lightning. Trash. Jiang Pengji looked coldly at the guy who was still smiling. His hair was blown away by the arrow. He looked panicked and lost. Although the other party didn't have murderous intent, it was full of malice to embarrass her. Since that was the case, she would give him a taste of his own medicine. Who asked that trash to have such a cheap hand? With a duong sound, the arrow steadily shot into the horizontal bar of the shaft of the carriage. The move alarmed the armored guards, and they all looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Wuxia was surprised at first, but when he saw the arrow explode in the air after being shot by his daughter, he felt a lingering fear in his heart. He was furious. Cheng was a beat slower to react. His face suddenly turned pale. They didn't know the target of the arrow. They only knew that it was aimed at Jiang Pengji, so they subconsciously thought that the arrow was meant to kill her. Chapter 263. Kojiao Xiaofan, damn, which bastard attacked the streamer? Doesn't he know that if he pisses off the streamer, she'll tear him apart with her bare hands? Tang roasted chestnut, I just blinked. What happened? It happened too fast. Jiang Pengji reacted in time to block the attack and retaliate. The viewers in the streaming room were all dumbfounded. At that moment, they wished there was a replay button so that they could go back a few seconds and see what happened in detail. Kojiao Xiaofan, a bastard, attacked the streamer with a bow and arrow, but the streamer is indeed a beautiful woman. She shot the arrow in the air and blew it up. She even retaliated with an arrow. She's so handsome that I can't even close my legs. After being reminded, everyone looked at the shattered remains of the arrow on the ground. Through the live stream's perspective, they saw the coward who had his hair blown off. His face was full of panic. He fell to the ground and almost peed in his pants. They all gave Jiang Pengji a thumbs up. Well done. A huge wave of rewards flooded in. Jiang Pengji had foreseen this and temporarily turned off the backstage notification sound. The group of people seemed to have a powerful background. The owner of the carriage had an even more powerful background. The armored guards all stepped forward and surrounded Jiang Pengji's group as if they were facing a formidable enemy. However, the troops were not to be trifled with. They immediately pulled out their broadswords and confronted them. Seeing that someone was about to be killed, Cheng saluted the group with a gloomy face. He spoke in a clear voice, which almost made Wuxia kneel. What does Prince Changshu mean by this? Huh? Prince Changshu? Wuxia was confused, but on the surface, he looked cold and emotionless. His eyes kept drifting in the direction of the carriage. The person in the carriage couldn't sit still after Cheng called out his identity. He asked someone to lift the veil, revealing a face of about 30 years old. What happened? He asked his attendants as if he didn't know anything. Your Highness, two Langjuns used an object in the distance as a target for fun, but they didn't expect a commoner to pass by on a horse and block the object. That commoner is extremely daring. He attacked the Langjuns in public and even alerted Your Highness. The attendant's voice was shrill, which sounded very harsh. Prince Changshu snorted and said coldly, a commoner attacking an aristocrat in broad daylight is a crime punishable by death. With just a few words, he had smoothed out the crisis that Jiang Pengji had faced previously. Instead, he had pinned a groundless crime on her head. At this moment, a young man who was accompanying them heard a familiar voice. He suddenly turned around, his eyes filled with surprise. He cupped his hands towards Prince Changshu and said, Your Highness, the person who spoke just now is my nephew. Please allow me to go and understand the situation before making a decision. Prince Changshu was initially a little displeased. After all, when that arrow hit the shaft of his carriage, he was so frightened that his heart almost stopped. However, when he saw who the young man who spoke was, he silently suppressed his dissatisfaction, and a faint smile appeared on his frightened face. Yumo's nephew must be an outstanding talent. Why don't we call him closer? Without waiting for Prince Changsho to finish, Cheng Jing excused himself and rode forward, ordering the armored guards to put down their spears. Everyone, stop. Seeing that Cheng Cheng wasn't injured, Cheng Jing felt slightly relieved. Wenfu, long time no see. Lu Shi was dumbfounded. The young man in front of him was at most in his 20s. Why did he call Cheng Cheng by his courtesy name? After all, Cheng Cheng was a few years older than him. It's been a few months since we last met in Langia. It has indeed been a long time. Yumo, come, let me introduce you. This is the county chief of Hu County, Lu Zhongqing. He is one of the extraordinary people in Dongqing that you always talk about. Now that you've met him, aren't you excited? Cheng Jing was dumbfounded, and Lu Shi was even more dumbfounded. As for Jiang Pengji, she already didn't know what to say. What happened just now? Why did you have a conflict with Prince Changsho's guards? Cheng Cheng's face became gloomy again. Lu Shi's expression was even worse, which made Cheng Jing's heart skip a beat. TSK, let me tell you about it. Just now, there was a despicable person who aimed an arrow at my head. I only shot away his crown, which made him look like a clown. I was already being very polite. Why, Lang Jun, do you want to reprimand me indiscriminately? Jiang Pengji urged her horse forward. She didn't have a good impression of Cheng Jing, or Cheng Yumo, whom Lu Shi had mentioned before. Cheng Jing looked embarrassed. Faced with Jiang Pengji's tough tone, he didn't get angry. Instead, he cupped his hands and asked. May I know who this Lang Jun is? Lu Shi put on a fake smile and said, my only son. May I know the name of the despicable person just now? He just wanted to make fun of them because they were tired from the long journey. Their clothes were unremarkable, and the decorations on their carriages were simple. If it were an ordinary merchant's carriage, they would probably have to swallow the humiliation. But since it was Lu Shi, the meaning was different. He deliberately emphasized the word only, and Cheng Jing suddenly realized that it was a serious matter. You misunderstood me, Lang Jun. I am not the kind of person who does not distinguish between right and wrong. Cheng Jing smiled bitterly and said, I was chatting happily with my friend just now, and I didn't notice what was happening around me. By the time I realized it, Lang Jun had already made that person lose face. Lu Shi's son was almost shot to death on the official road outside of Shangjing. He couldn't imagine what would happen if that really happened. Serves him right for being despicable. Lang Jun, this has nothing to do with you. I won't ask you to speak for me, but I hope you won't plead for that person either. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue. Although she didn't act arrogantly, her attitude was quite tough. A kind person would be bullied, and a kind horse would be ridden. The rule of the law of the jungle was even more straightforward in today's stratified society. If it wasn't her, but any other ordinary person, they would have fallen off the horse in fright. Maybe they would have been trampled by the horse's panicked hooves. White was a well-trained warhorse from the northern borderline. She had reacted calmly just now, which prevented a tragedy. Cheng Jing nodded and said, of course. Cheng Cheng snorted and said disdainfully, Prince Changsho? Humph. Cheng Jing went back and told the identity of Lu Shi and his people. Not only did Prince Changsho's expression change, but his attitude was completely biased towards Lu Shi and his people. The young man who accompanied them also looked as pale as a sheet. The two Langjuns who had been joking with each other were trembling and their lips were pale. How could they have known that those ordinary people, who looked like commoners, had such a powerful background? Who asked you to be despicable? Who asked you to be despicable? Who asked you to be despicable? The young man who had shot the arrow looked at his own hand with tears in his eyes. He wanted to go back in time and slap himself. Who in Dongqing was the most dangerous person to offend? Lu Shi was definitely on the list. He was this year's general evaluation officer, and they had almost shot his son. How could they expect him to give them good results? To be more serious, Lu Shi only had to move his pen and give them a bad evaluation. Their careers would be over. Even if they didn't enter the officialdom, it would be impossible for them to be famous scholars with just a title. Obviously, Lu Shi was not such a generous person. Chapter 264. Lanting, you weren't scared, right? On the way into the city, Lu Shi and Cheng Cheng looked gloomy. The atmosphere around them was very oppressive, as if they were brewing anger. Cheng Cheng's wife, who was sitting in the carriage, knew about it. She quickly asked Jiang Pengji to stop riding and sit in the carriage for a while. She looked at Jiang Pengji carefully and was relieved when she was sure she was fine. These foppish boys are getting more and more presumptuous. They don't know the teachings of the saints. They are getting more and more unscrupulous just because they are protected by their ancestors. Fortunately, Lanting has excellent archery skills and Lu County Chief is watching over us. Otherwise, there would be another bloody case under the Emperor's feet. Cheng Cheng's wife was very angry. She squeezed Jiang Pengji's hands and said, "Look at you. Your hands are cold." Jiang Pengji smiled weakly, as if she was pretending to be strong. Cheng Cheng's wife felt even more sorry for her. Jiang Pengji chose to ignore the comments from the audience in the streaming room that her acting skills were enough to win an Oscar. After a while, Jiang Pengji pulled her hands out of Cheng Cheng's hands. She looked obedient and said in a low voice, "Auntie, I wasn't scared. I was born this way, born this way. It's normal for you to be full of vigor and yang energy to be in your growing period. Yet, your hands are so cold. It's obvious that you're overflowing with cold energy. Lu Zhongqing is indeed a man. He doesn't know how to raise a child. How can he be so careless?" Cheng Cheng's wife raised her eyebrows. She was a little dissatisfied with Lu Shi. A man was indeed a man. He gave birth to a child but didn't take care of him. Poor Lu Shi lost his mother at such a young age. Who else would take care of a child so meticulously except for his biological mother? Jiang Pengji's smile froze a little, so Cheng Cheng's wife didn't notice it. "Didn't you ask a doctor to come to the mansion to recuperate?" Cheng Cheng's wife asked. Before Jiang Pengji could answer, she continued, "Lanting, you can't ignore your health just because you are young. If a man lacks yang energy and has too much yin energy, it will hinder the reproduction of his children. You are the only legitimate son of Lu County Chief. The heavy responsibility of raising a house is on your shoulders." Jiang Pengji was speechless. "Auntie, I do know a divine doctor of Xinglin, who is very knowledgeable about health. That person is currently in Shangjing. When everything settles down, Auntie will take you to have a look. You're still young, so you don't have to be so shy about this kind of thing. You should be magnanimous." When the gentle person chanted, the power was comparable to the band-tightening spell. Jiang Pengji could not do anything about it. Other than nodding his head in agreement, he would occasionally mumble something. After waiting for a while, the convoy was finally allowed to enter Shangjing. After passing through the Vermilion City Gate, the bustling ancient city was like a beautiful woman with a veil covering her face. After a bout of shyness and anger, she was finally willing to slowly lift a corner of her veil, revealing a beauty that could captivate even the birds and beasts, and outshine the moon and flowers. Lu Shi had sent a letter to Feng Ren a long time ago. He planned to stay and eat at Feng Ren's house for a while. Feng Ren also knew Lu Shi's temper. How could he refuse? As soon as they entered the city, a steward in fine clothes came forward and asked, "Are you from County Chief Lu's mansion?" "I am Lu Shi. I remember you, Xianda's manservant. Look at how you're dressed. You've been promoted." Lu Shi got off the horse. Even though he was facing a manservant, he did not have the arrogance of an ordinary aristocrat. The steward immediately felt honored, and a warm feeling flowed in his heart. He had been sent to wait for Lu Shi's carriage because he had seen Lu Shi's face before. He didn't expect Lu Shi to recognize him as well. It had to be known that this was a few years ago. At that time, the steward was just a servant who served tea. At that moment, the steward's face was full of smiles, and his attitude toward Lu Shi became more intimate. Master has asked the mansion to prepare a courtyard for you. Please come with me. If Hejin County was said to be the pretty daughter of a humble family, then the prosperous and mighty Shangjing was said to be the daughter of a noble family who was dressed in luxurious clothes and had a head full of pearls and jade. She was graceful and elegant, and her appearance was so beautiful that it could cause the downfall of a city. At first glance, the houses were scattered in picturesque disorder, the streets were neat, and the people and merchants who came and went were dressed neatly. There was not a beggar in shabby clothes in the streets and alleys. It was as if this was what a prosperous ancient era should look like, but it was just as if. Jiang Pengji swept her gaze across. Her eyes, which were originally filled with some interest, suddenly became unhappy. Let's go. I'll find out where Master Yuanjing is staying later. After a short rest, I'll bring you to visit him. Although he couldn't bear to part with his daughter, Lu Shi knew that he would only make things worse if he helped her. She could only walk down that path alone. If he took Yuanjing as his teacher, he would be able to make friends with many young elites. It would also be good for him to accumulate some capital in the future. At the very least, he would be able to keep a clean reputation. Jiang Pengji nodded. She had heard of Yuanjing's name for a long time. Now that she was about to meet him in person, she wanted to see what was so special about him. On the other side, Prince Changshou's mood could be imagined after Lu Shi rudely brushed him off. He didn't look happy throughout the whole process. The foppish playboy was even more careful. His expression was as gloomy as a bitter gourd, as if he would pout and burst into tears in the next second. Cheng Jing was especially disdainful of his attitude. As a man, he dared to take responsibility for his actions. Since he had the guts to make fun of the commoners, he should have been mentally prepared to kick an iron plate. He was proud of himself when he bullied the commoners, but he panicked after offending Lu Shi. His ugly behavior made people want to vomit. Cheng Jing glanced at the gorgeously dressed Langjuns at the gathering. Yes, gorgeously dressed. There was nothing wrong with the phrase. He hadn't been to Shangjing for a few years, and the atmosphere there had changed. Not only did the men put on makeup, but they also drew on their eyebrows, painted their lips, and dyed their cheeks red. They even had to deliberately tighten their waists. They walked like willows swaying in the wind. Every one of them was more delicate than a girl. If it wasn't for the fact that the general evaluation officer, Lu Shi, didn't like men who were too delicate, their outfits would have been even more unsightly. Cheng Jing really couldn't talk to those people, so he just sat in the corner and slowly drank his tea to calm himself down. As for the two whimpering Langjuns in the distance, he felt like he would go blind if he looked at them for too long. Yumo, why are you sitting here alone? Aren't you going to play with them? As he was feeling depressed, a wisp of light fragrance hit him. A young man in a mint green shirt sat directly next to him. The newcomer was tall and slender. His skin was as delicate as flawless white porcelain. He didn't put on any makeup, but he was better than a girl. He had bright eyes, red lips, and white teeth. He was truly a handsome young man. Cheng Jing didn't bother to look up. He knew who it was just by listening to the voice. What are you playing at? I don't want to look at you. My stomach still hurts. That's why you don't have your meals on time. Han Yu curled his lips and quickly took the fruit in front of Cheng Jing and stuffed it into his mouth. The slightly sour juice overflowed his mouth. He said with disgust, I gave you such a raw fruit. No wonder you have a stomachache. Cheng Jing's mouth twitched, and he continued to drink his tea. Chapter 265. The host of the gathering was Prince Changshou. The purpose of the gathering was for students to exchange knowledge, but in fact, it was to attract talented students. The Chengs and Prince Changsho's relationship was somewhat indirect. Cheng Jing had to come because of his pride, but Han Yu didn't have that many concerns. My teacher lost a game of chess with Zixiao and was urged to go to Ji Shan's hot spring today. I slept in for a while, but they didn't wake me up. Han Yu was depressed. His friends were going to exploit his teacher's money, but he was left behind because he woke up late. Zixiao's chess skills have improved a lot. I can't believe he won a game against my teacher. Although Master Yuanjing wasn't as good as the rumors said, his relative was proficient in calligraphy and painting. Any one of them could be regarded as a master. It wasn't difficult to be proficient in one of them, but it was difficult to be proficient in all of them. After all, a person's energy was limited. There was no other reason other than talent. Cheng Jing couldn't help but laugh. He understood Han Yu's depression. Ji Shan's hot spring was famous in Dongqing. Many gatherings were held there, and many students liked to go there. More importantly, it wasn't easy to make their teacher lose a game and pay for a student to go to the hot spring willingly. Han Yu muttered. Zixiao's chess skills are getting better. I felt like I was being led by the nose when I played a game with him yesterday. I was left alone by them. It was boring, so I came to find you. I saw that you had nothing to do at the gathering. It was boring. Cheng Jing shook his head and said, "It would be better for you to go to the brothel to have fun than here." Prince Changsho seemed to be kind, but he was secretly ambitious. He had his eyes on many talents from aristocratic families. Han Yu really shouldn't have come here. Unexpectedly, Han Yu said with a bitter face. Go to the brothel? Let those girls look at me and have fun? He wasn't bragging, but all the girls in Shangjing were not as good-looking as him. Cheng Jing was speechless. He had seen narcissistic people, but he couldn't stand Han Yu being so narcissistic every day. Right, this is for you. Han Yu took out a piece of bamboo from his sleeve. What's this? Cheng Jing took it and saw that it was his teacher's handwriting, which said, "The examination question is out. My teacher left it for you. He said that you would know when you read it." How would I know if you don't know? Han Yu answered honestly. Cheng Jing's fingers traced the words on it. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he suddenly understood. He was speechless. This thing of yours came a little late, Cheng Jing said regretfully. Han Yu was confused and asked, "Do you know what the teacher is talking about?" If I'm not wrong, he's probably referring to the General Evaluation Officer, Lu Zhongqing. The final exam question was set by the General Evaluation Officer. Lu Shi had not yet arrived in Shangjing, so no one knew what question he would set. The question had already been set, which actually implied that Lu Shi had already arrived. So, Lu Zhongqing has already arrived in Shangjing? It happened about 2 hours ago. Cheng Jing signaled Han Yu with his eyes, "Look at the two crying Langjuns over there. They were ignorant and offended County Chief Lu. Now they look sad. They are not hopeless. They know what will happen to them." Han Yu said, "I've met County Chief Lu. He's not as violent as the rumors say. He's a gentleman like the bright moon. He has a gentle temperament and treats people generously, not inferior to you, Yumo." What did they do? How could they offend County Chief Lu who had just arrived in Shangjing? The exam was just around the corner, and they had the courage to offend the General Evaluation Officer. It was true that the General Evaluation Officer had to be fair and impartial. He couldn't be partial to anyone, but it was easy to kill someone. It was no wonder that the two looked like they had lost their parents. Without a strong enough background, they shouldn't have confronted Lu Shi at this time. They amused themselves with the passers-by. They didn't expect that the Langjun of County Chief Lu's family would pass by on a horse in plain clothes. They thought that he was a pushover and almost killed him. County Chief Lu only had one son, how could he not be angry? Han Yu was stunned and it took him a long time to react. Wait, who did you say that they almost killed? Did he hear it wrong? Qing Jing was quite confused. Han Yu's reaction was a little too extreme. He repeated, the Langjun of County Chief Lu. Han Yu was speechless. Wenbin, what's wrong? Qing Jing couldn't help but ask. The Langjun of County Chief Lu's family. He is a devil. He is more difficult to deal with than County Chief Lu. Han Yu took a deep breath and said, if they offended County Chief Lu, they would at most give them a warning for the sake of their reputation. But that Langjun kills without spilling blood. Qing Jing was doubtful and couldn't believe it. How could it be? Judging from his behavior, he doesn't look like a person who cares about every little thing. Han Yu used to think so too. Until he left Hejian County, he heard all kinds of rumors one after another. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that he dared to go against all the laws of the world, implemented the purchase restriction under the pressure of many aristocratic families, and even provoked many aristocratic families in Hejian County. Han Yu didn't dare to look down on the Langjun of the Lu County chief's family. After asking Feng Jin for confirmation, Feng Jin gave him a firm answer that the purchase restriction must have been set by Lu Shi. It was not a big deal to seek death. It was a real ability to live well after seeking death. Let's wait and see. Those two are going to be unlucky. They will at least be hurt. Han Yu curled his lips as if he was watching a good show. His eyes were sparkling. Qing Jing was speechless. He didn't know whether he was wrong about Lu Shi or Han Yu. Oh, I almost forgot something important. Han Yu quickly sat up straight. He suddenly remembered something important. Lu Lanting came to Shangjing with his father to find a master and study in Langyi Academy. According to County Chief Lu's style, he will go to the master as soon as he settles down. If I go there now, I might see something interesting. Qing Jing smiled. Master said a long time ago that he will only accept 4 disciples in his life. Now that the 4 are here, there are no more places. There was still hope for studying, but it was impossible for him to become a disciple. His master looked not only for talent but also for fate. Han Yu said as if he wanted to see the world in chaos, that's why it's worth watching. This gathering is so boring. It's either I flatter you or you flatter me. It's so boring. Instead of wasting time here, it's better to go and see that young Langjun. When are you going to rein in your jumpy temperament? Although that was what he said, Qing Jing was already convinced. He had had enough of this boring gathering. Instead of wasting time here, it was better to go to Jishan Hot Spring to drink, appreciate the flowers through the fog, and talk about poetry and painting. Jishan Hot Spring. Jiang Pengji arrived at the Lu mansion. She thought she would see her friend Feng Jin, who she hadn't seen for a long time, but she was told that he had gone to Jishan Hot Spring to enjoy himself. Chapter 266. I really can't tell that you're actually this kind of Yuanjing. When Lu Shi found out where Master Yuanjing was staying, he found out from the boy servant that Master Yuanjing had brought a group of students to Jishan to soak in the spring. It was estimated that they would be soaking for a few days. Lu Shi, who had come empty-handed, had a slightly cracked expression on his face. Was he supposed to wait for a few days? In that room, Lu Shi was extremely depressed. Why was he depressed? He could not possibly bring his daughter to the hot spring to look for Master Yuanjing, could he? Although hot springs were also divided into male and female hot springs, they were separated. Not only that, but in recent years, the culture had gradually become more conservative, and the status of women had been declining at a speed visible to the naked eye. The belittling of women in the outside world had also caused their freedom to be restricted, which led to the cold weather. Most of the people who went to the spring were men, and there were almost no women. Even if there were women, most of them would be noblewomen of noble families. There would be people following them in and out to avoid accidents. Wasn't it ridiculous to ask Lu Shi to bring his daughter to a men's spa just to find Yuan Jing? However, if he did not look for Yuan Jing, he could only wait until he was done playing with his students and left Ji Shan. If Master Yuan Jing was so powerful, why didn't he predict his plan? Why did he choose to soak in the spring at this critical moment? Annoying, Omega. Lu Shi silently hated Yuan Jing for a while. He sighed and continued to think of a solution. Before he could come up with a solution, Feng Ren took the initiative to invite Lu Shi to Ji Shan's hot spring to relax. He had even thought of a reason. The assessment is around the corner. The young talents of Dongqing will gather in Shangjing. These days, all kinds of scholarly gatherings and poetry gatherings are happening one after another. Zhongqing is always busy with work, so he should take a break from time to time. Ji Mountain is a popular place for scholarly gatherings and poetry gatherings. Why don't we go together? Although he said that he was fooling around, he could actually take the opportunity to visit Dong Qingjun incognito and see what kind of person he was in the examination hall. Lu Shi pursed his lips and didn't say anything. When did the secretariat become so free? Judging from Feng Ren's familiarity with the hot spring, he was probably a regular customer of Ji Shan's hot spring, the kind that would go there every few days. On the other hand, Lu Shi was only the county chief of Hu County, but he had been busy for a few years. He worked day and night, and he didn't even have a holiday. He took the salary of a county governor and did the workload of an emperor. Feng Ren was one of the top head of the secretariat, a real high-ranking official. How could he be so free? After hesitating for a while, Lu Shi decided to ask for his daughter's opinion. If she said yes, then he would go. If not, then he would wait a few more days. Needless to say, Jiang Pengji's answer was to go. Why not? Jiang Pengji asked Lu Shi. Lu Shi opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. That's right, why not? But daughter, you are a daughter. Lu Shi's mind was in a mess. He felt that he and his daughter were thinking about different things. Due to geographical reasons, there were many natural hot springs in the northern part of Dongqing. Among them, Mount Ji, which was near Shangjing, had the highest concentration. During the Great Xia dynasty, the royal family had built a hot spring palace in Ji Mountain, and several generations of emperors had expanded it. Those emperors held the hot spring in high esteem. Many books and unofficial histories even believed that the hot spring had the miraculous effect of increasing one's lifespan, prolonging one's life, and curing all kinds of diseases. It was also respectfully called the immortal spring by many common people. Whether it was the royal family or the common people, they loved the hot spring very much. Especially in late autumn, they couldn't wait to move. After the fall of the Great Xia dynasty, the world was divided. Dongqing established the dynasty with Shangyang County as its capital, which was now called Shangjing. Mount Ji, which had many hot springs, was near Shangjing. It only took 1 to 4 hours to get there by horse carriage. The distance was short and it was very convenient. The royal family of Dongqing took advantage of the previous dynasty. They slightly renovated the original hot spring palace and changed it into a new royal palace. Because 2 or 3 generations of emperors of Dongqing were incompetent, their goals in life were to seek pleasure and pleasure. Naturally, they paid great attention to the hot spring palace that brought them joy. They visited it 4 times a year, and each visit lasted at least a month. Each visit was a waste of manpower and money. There were many hot springs in the Ji mountain range. The largest area was occupied by the royal family and became the Royal Hot Spring Palace. The other areas were occupied by various aristocratic families and wealthy merchants. They were converted into hot spring hotels of different sizes and served different guests. The rich and powerful could enjoy quality service, and the common people could also experience hot spring in ordinary hot spring hotels. Therefore, when the weather was cold, the hot spring hotels were especially popular. Mount Ji's hot spring was not just a place to soak in hot springs. After many years of development, it had long become a tourist attraction centered around the hot spring. Not only could one soak in hot springs, but there were also wine shops, tea houses, restaurants, and shops that sold all kinds of exquisite small goods. In addition, there were many scholars and beautiful ladies who held elegant poetry gatherings. There were even many brothels and brothels. At night, it was as bright as day. The Feng family's horse carriage drove all the way from the foot of the mountain to the mountainside. Finally, it stopped in front of an extremely luxurious mansion. When they got out of the carriage, there were already many luxurious horse carriages parked neatly around it. Upon closer inspection, there were all kinds of family emblems on the carriages. If it wasn't for Xianda leading the way, I would have thought that this was a mansion of a noble family. I couldn't tell that it was a hot spring hotel. Other than the common people, the other gentry families didn't build hot spring hotels to make money. They built them to provide a place for their children to have fun and enjoy themselves. The hot spring hotel that Lu Shi saw was many times more luxurious and larger than his Lu mansion. Extravagant and luxurious. Other than these 4 words, he couldn't think of a better way to describe it. This is under the name of Prince Changsho. It said that it was built according to his mansion. During the evaluation month, it's open to all young talents for free. That's why it's the place that holds the most gatherings and poetry events. The more the merrier, the more the merrier. I'm just here to join in the fun. Lu Shi was speechless. Jiang Pengji, who was behind him, secretly chuckled. She didn't expect that such a mature guy like Feng Jin would have such an interesting father. Feng Ren's words were very clear. He came because the hot spring hotel was luxurious and exquisite, and it didn't cost him any money. Prince Changsho. Lu Shi frowned. He's so brazenly trying to win me over. He's really ambitious. Lu Shi had spent all his energy on Hu County in the past few years. He didn't pay much attention to the various forces in the court. Even though Gu Min had told him that Prince Changsho would be one of the contenders for the throne in the future, Gu Min's history was not good. She only remembered that the guy had been eliminated very quickly and was a coward who was too soft to listen to. The only famous advisor under him was Qiguan Rang. All this information had led Lu Shi astray. He had the impression that Prince Changsho was the same, cowardly, weak and useless. Feng Ren coughed and said in a low voice, "Let's go to the hot spring first before we talk about this." They picked up their bowls to eat meat and put down their chopsticks to curse. They hadn't enjoyed the free hot spring provided by Prince Changsho, so they didn't talk about it for the time being. If they wanted to talk about it, they had to wait until they enjoyed the hot spring. Lu Shi was speechless. Chapter 267. There were basically no rules for ordinary people to soak in the hot spring, but it was different for the gentry. In order to reflect their status, there were rules everywhere. Jiang Pengji was led to a courtyard by the servant girl of the hot spring hotel. First, she had to burn incense and bathe from head to toe. Her hair had to be carefully washed. More than 50 kinds of spices were ground into powder and placed in exquisite powder boxes of the same size for the guests to use. She rejected the servant girl of the hot spring hotel and entered the bath that was about 3 to 4 square meters to take a bath. She quickly wet her hair and washed it. The clothes that she wore after the bath were folded neatly and placed aside. The material was smooth and airtight, and there was a faint orchid fragrance on it. From the cloth to the clothes, it would only be worn by one guest once. After changing it, it had to be burned. It could not be recycled a second time. Not to mention other things, just this alone was shockingly expensive. Similarly, it was shockingly extravagant. Jiang Pengji got out of the bath and slightly wiped the water droplets on her body. Then, she wrapped the bulge in front of her chest tightly with the belt around her chest. Finally, she picked up the snow-white clothes and put them on. She used the same snow-white belt to tie a knot around her waist. Fortunately, the culture of this era was more conservative. Even if it was a hot spring, few people would be shirtless. Otherwise, Jiang Pengji would be able to see a shining white body. She was not shy, but she could not stand the extremely deformed bodies. It was an eyesore. Although it was just a hot spring hotel, since it was built according to the model of Prince Changshuo's mansion, it was naturally extravagant. Pavilions, corridors, pavilions, buildings, platforms, halls, and halls were all available. There were open waterside pavilions on the hot spring or on higher ground. After bathing, one could have a drink or two there and look into the distance. The hot spring was of different sizes. Each hot spring was separated by exquisite rockery, waterside pavilions, and pine and cypress trees. Although it was open, it also protected privacy. When bathing in the hot spring, one could look up at the sky. It made one's mind open, and it was a different feeling. Dense steam rose from the water surface. The sound of musical instruments entered one's ears. There was endless singing and laughter, as if there were people chatting and laughing. Indistinctly, there were the silhouettes of people drinking with each other. It was ethereal like a fairyland on earth. Lu Shi and Feng Ren had already cleaned up. One of them was taking a nap in the spring, while the other was drinking tea by the shore. They seemed to be discussing something. When Jiang Pengji came over, Lu Shi hurriedly said to her, "I still have something to discuss with the head of the secretariat." Lanting, go to another room. What a joke. That was a daughter, not a son. Jiang Pengji responded with a sound of agreement and allowed the servant girl to lead her to another unoccupied hot spring. Along the way, she saw many men who looked to be in their teens or 20s. Their faces were painted with exquisite makeup, and their lips were painted with rouge. Under the rising mist, their figures appeared graceful due to their delicate steps. Not only that, these people's clothes were always loose, revealing most of their chests. She silently moved her eyes away and clicked on the live stream. Eyes, I can't let her be the only one to suffer. Only a good host can bear hardships together. She gave herself a like, and the viewers in the stream were speechless. Originally, he thought that the live broadcast would be taking a break for a day. He didn't expect that the other party would start without warning, and the live broadcast was so unbearable. Lo Siji Lianmeng, host, are you ready to drive? They didn't mind seeing the host pressing the handsome young man to the ground and ravaging him, but they did mind seeing a group of fat men with big ears, ordinary looks, and bodies full of fat torturing their eyes in front of the camera. In this world that values appearance, can you not be so cruel? Dashu Xiaobing, my eyes are going blind. Host, you are so cruel. Can you imagine? A fat pig in his 20s, whose height and body width were almost the same, walking with his waist twisting and turning like an orchid? It's fine if his chest is exposed, but where are his abdominal muscles and mermaid lines? They only see black chest hair, a bulging belly, and greasy fat. Oh, and a big cleavage. Jug chestnut, I looked at that uncle's chest, and then looked down at mine. I suddenly feel that I don't deserve to be a woman. My roommates always laugh at me for being flat-chested. I used to deny it, but now I can only cry and admit. I am flat-chested. Tangchao chestnut, #perverted. Speaking of which, I haven't seen the host's chest yet. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and walked past the man with the big cleavage without changing her expression. Her chest. How should she put it? When she saved Cheng Cheng, the system gave her a reward: plump and milky breasts. Raise your wrists high and turn your body, and let your breasts cover your clothes. Under Jiang Pengji's persuasion, the system didn't directly send the reward to her. Instead, it sent it to the backstage in the form of a card. Of course, she didn't use it. Lu Shi's body was only 12 years old, and there were still 3 to 4 months before he turned 13. Why would he need breasts when he was so young? Give me some sake. She pushed open the door that only served as a cover and entered. There was a small hot spring that was 5 or 6 square meters in size. In the center of the hot spring stood a graceful stone statue of a fairy flying in the sky. The statue's palms and fluttering clothes were cleverly changed into plates for serving tea and wine. The servant bowed and left after receiving the order. Jiang Pengji first tested the temperature of the hot spring with her fingertips, then she put her feet in and sat by the spring. There were also 2 delicately shaped stone lions by the spring. They carried trays on their heads, and visitors could place food on them while enjoying the hot spring leisurely, enjoying the delicacies, and admiring the beautiful scenery around them. To be honest, Jiang Pengji came from the distant future. As the head of the army, she had never experienced such luxurious service. The people in the ancient times really knew how to enjoy themselves. They used limited resources to make themselves live well. The service in the hot spring restaurant was very good. Not long after, 2 pretty maids came in one after the other with sake and cups. They put down the items in their hands after getting Jiang Pengji's permission. Throughout the whole process, they did not make a single sound. At that time, the door was still open, and Jiang Pengji could see what was happening in the waterside pavilions outside. She pointed outside and asked one of the servants, "Not only do you have soaking soup here, but you also provide other things." The servant had a gentle and appropriate smile on her lips. She followed Jiang Pengji's line of sight, and her pretty face suddenly turned pale. The other servant was afraid that she would say something wrong, so she hurriedly said with a smile, "If you like it, I am naturally willing to serve you, Lang Jun." The servants were all carefully selected. Whether it was their appearance, the way they spoke, or the way they walked, they all looked like they had been measured with a ruler. In a place like the hot spring, although they were dressed very tightly, in front of a group of men who only wore a layer of clothing, it was more likely to cause an adrenal response. Of course, they were all literate people, so they wouldn't force themselves on them, but it was inevitable that they would take advantage of them. Frankly speaking, in the eyes of the men who came to the hot spring to enjoy themselves, these servants were not much nobler than the ladies in the brothels. Jiang Pengji curled her lips and revealed an indescribably frivolous smile. The servant didn't understand. She thought that Jiang Pengji wanted them to serve her, but then she saw Jiang Pengji pull her feet out of the water. She lifted a jar of wine with one hand, opened the seal, raised her head, and directly poured the entire jar of wine into her mouth. Occasionally, some of the wine dripped from her chin and slid down her neck. The 2 maids were a little stunned. They had never seen a Langjun drink so boldly and unrestrainedly. Jiang Pengji looked down at them with a clear look. "I am drunk." It was time to settle the score. Chapter 268. Langjun, Langjun. You, the maids hurried forward, and Jiang Pengji drank a jar of wine in front of them. Although her eyes were still clear, her steps were a little shaky, and her figure seemed to be swaying as she walked. She looked like a typical drunkard. They didn't know if Jiang Pengji was really drunk, but they knew that if they didn't keep an eye on her, she would fall into the hot spring. If something happened to her, they would lose their lives. They couldn't let anything happen to her. Jiang Pengji avoided the obstruction of the 2 maids and left the hot spring. She stared straight at a waterside pavilion in front of her. As the saying goes, one can wear out iron shoes in fruitless search, but by chance one finds it without any effort. She didn't take the initiative to find the 2 men, but they couldn't wait to die. The 2 men, who were targeted by Jiang Pengji, didn't realize that they were in danger. Instead, they laughed and chatted with their companions. One of their hands restlessly touched the maid's body. Looking at the maid's embarrassed expression, but she didn't dare to resist, the fright they had during the day was greatly alleviated. If you like it, you can summon this maidservant tonight to relieve your longing. TSK. This looks decent. It's indeed the hot spring hotel under Prince Changshuo's name. The maidservants here are all beautiful. The young man who was called brother was moved, but he couldn't show too much enthusiasm. It would make him look like a pervert. This. How can I do that? A gentleman doesn't take what others love. How dare I take away what you like? A snow-white robe was loose on his body. The belt was loose, revealing most of his chest. Because he had been pampered for years, his skin was fair and rosy. It was more delicate than a girl's. However, wine and women had taken away his body. His eyebrows were drooping, and he looked listless. Hey, you and I are still fussing about this? Women are like clothes, and brothers are like hands and feet. This is just an insignificant woman. If you like her, you can enjoy her. The young man waved his hand carelessly. Birds of a feather flocked together. The two fops' auras matched each other. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hang out together. Since you said so, then, before he could respond, the smell of alcohol assaulted his nostrils. Although it was not pungent, it diluted the lingering body fragrance of the maid. The young man raised his head in annoyance, only to see a drunken teenager holding a wine jar blocking his way. Remember who I am? Jiang Pengji narrowed her eyes and looked down at the two young men sitting in the waterside pavilion with a faint smile. The tourists who were enjoying the cool found that the atmosphere was not right. They could not help but pay attention to this place. They either watched the show with cold eyes or were secretly curious. With the evaluation around the corner, no one wanted to be dragged into this mess. Strange, how would I know who you are? A young man smiled contemptuously. Of course, he did not recognize Jiang Pengji. He thought she was just an ordinary tourist. You don't know? Jiang Pengji squinted her eyes as if she was tipsy. Suddenly, she moved closer to one of them. You drunkard, stay away from me. This is not an ordinary hot spring hotel, not just any lowly person can come here. The young man leaned back and politely declined the smell of alcohol on Jiang Pengji's body. His face was full of disgust. Jiang Pengji suddenly opened her mouth, revealing a mouthful of snow-white teeth. Her smile was evil and wanton. Just as the two young men were about to lose their patience and wanted to push Jiang Pengji away, a snow-white foot suddenly appeared. Ah, there was a loud splash, and the hot spring next to the waterside pavilion splashed a huge amount of water. Everyone watched helplessly as one of the young men was kicked off the waterside pavilion by the drunk teenager. His whole body flipped over and fell into the hot spring. More importantly, the kick was aimed at his face. Because of the sudden movement, the loose clothes on the young man's body immediately became unable to fall off. His belt loosened and his lapel opened, revealing his white body. The young man was still flopping in the water. He was caught off guard and choked. His entire person seemed to be in an extremely sorry state. What are you looking at? You go down too. Without waiting for the others to react, Jiang Pengji turned around and kicked the other young man into the hot spring. There was another splash, and a huge splash happened to fall on the previous young man. The two of them rolled in the hot spring. Ha ha ha, don't I look like a skinned frog? Jiang Pengji laughed wantonly. She crossed the waterside pavilion's fence and stood on the rock garden next to the waterside pavilion. What are you looking at? Bring me wine. Jiang Pengji turned her head and scolded the stunned servant girl. Bring me wine. The servant girl seemed to have woken up from a dream. Her mind was not clear yet, but her feet had already obediently retreated. She had completely forgotten that the most correct thing to do at this time should be to go forward to persuade and eliminate the conflict between the two parties as much as possible. She should not help the tyrant by giving Jiang Pengji wine. Who allowed you to stick your head out? Jiang Pengji smiled and stepped on one of their heads. She kicked him back into the hot spring with an undisguised evil and carefree expression on her face. Who are you? How dare you touch me? Oh, before he could finish his sentence, Jiang Pengji stepped him back into the hot spring. Caught off guard, he choked on his nose and mouth. Who am I? Jiang Pengji took the wine jar that the servant girl handed over. She removed the seal and raised her head to drink a mouthful of wine. She quickly stepped on another person's head back into the water. The people who were watching the show could not sit still, but no one dared to stop Jiang Pengji. Among the two youths, which one was smaller? They were actually kicked into the hot spring by a teenager. Even if the stranger had the advantage of being caught off guard, it could be seen that he was not weak in martial arts. His leg skills were excellent. Looking at the teenager's appearance, it was obvious that he was half drunk and unconscious. If they went forward to stop the fight and were implicated by the other party without distinguishing between friend and foe, they would be humiliated and kicked into the hot spring as well. Wouldn't they want to die of shame? The heavens are watching what people do. Did your brains not come out of your mother's womb? You don't even know who you have offended, and you still have the face to threaten me. Who gave you the courage? Jiang Pengji scolded them sternly. Her eyes were sharp, and there was some hostility in them. With such a performance, no one dared to stop the fight. They could only call for the person in charge of the hot spring. Help! Help! The two of them wanted to climb out of the hot spring, but Jiang Pengji's legs were faster than their reaction speed. Their brains were about to be kicked silly. In the end, they had no choice but to shamefully ask for help. Naturally, they could not avoid choking on a few mouthfuls of hot soup. As soon as they opened their mouths to ask for help, Jiang Pengji laughed even more arrogantly. She looked at them as if they were two mice in boiling water. Young Lang Jun, a man can be killed, but not humiliated. No matter how much hatred you have for these two, you should not be humiliated like this. Even if Jiang Pengji was drunk, such arrogant and humiliating actions still touched the sensitive nerves of many people. Jiang Pengji grinned and glared at the guy who begged for mercy. Chapter 269. Jiang Pengji's blunt retort made the man's face turn red and then green. She clicked her tongue, turned her head, and sneered at the two embarrassed young men who had choked on the hot soup. Today, you two almost killed me and the people of Shangjing City. Why didn't you think about what would happen to you now? The two drowned rats were full of hatred, but when they heard Jiang Pengji's words, they suddenly shivered and sobered up. They were terrified, and they didn't even dare to struggle. Many onlookers witnessed what happened. They were disgusted by Jiang Pengji's arrogant behavior, but after hearing her words and looking at the two men's guilty expressions, many smart people changed their expressions. They pretended nothing had happened and went on with what they were supposed to do. Obviously, the drunk teenager had suffered a loss at the hands of the two men and almost lost his life. Now, he was there to get back at them. It was better for outsiders not to get involved in this kind of dispute. Tisk, bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Jiang Pengji raised her head and drank a mouthful of wine. According to the way she drank, the jar of wine was going to be empty again. Weren't you two very arrogant in the day? Why are you so cowardly now? Where's your backbone, your pride, your courage to use my life to take pleasure? Have they all been fed to the dogs? Huh, idiots. Jiang Pengji was not drunk. She was very sober. She was there to cause trouble, so she naturally wanted to vent her anger. It was Shangjing. She couldn't kill the two men, but she could stomp them into the ground in front of everyone. A villain intoxicated by success. At that moment, the surroundings were quiet. A crisp sound came from one side, and the atmosphere became more and more tense. Jiang Pengji maintained her sneer and looked at the person who said that. She asked in a dangerous tone. Are you saying that I am a villain intoxicated by success? The one who spoke was a young man in his early 20s. His skin was dyed a bit red because of the hot spring. His face was like jade and his eyes were like dots of lacquer. His dark cloud-like hair was wet and hung on both sides. Through the dense mist, his figure seemed a bit frail. Aren't you a villain intoxicated by success? The man was not afraid of Jiang Pengji's sneer. Instead, he snorted and said, according to what you said just now, these two almost killed you by mistake. Since that's the case, you should be a gentleman and take revenge if you have a grudge against them. On the other hand, what you've done is to humiliate the two of them in public while you're drunk. What you've done is really inappropriate. To put it bluntly, wasn't this the behavior of a playboy? The bullet screen in the streaming room stopped. Many viewers were afraid that Jiang Pengji would kill someone in the next second and stain the hot spring with blood. In fact, Jiang Pengji did not. Instead, she laughed cheerfully. She did not even tease the two fops. If I'm a vile person, won't this Langjun be overflowing with the heart of a saint? Jiang Pengji threw the wine jar in her hand into the hot spring. The water splashed and splashed on the faces of the two playboys. I'm standing here today and humiliating them because I'm still alive. If I was unfortunately shot by that arrow and died on the spot, would you feel sorry for me? Jiang Pengji snorted coldly. I know you can't do it. After all, you're not related to me. The dead will always be dead. They're not as important as the living. If you still want them to live, shut up, or I'll kill them myself. The young man's face changed. He said, you're really twisting words and forcing logic. You're taking advantage of your ancestors' influence to commit such crimes. You're wrong. They're taking advantage of their ancestors' influence to amuse themselves with the lives of the commoners. If the commoners die, they'll be scolded at most. No one in the King of Hell can uphold justice for the dead. Jiang Pengji suddenly raised her voice and said, if you want to reprimand someone, you should first scold these two beasts who are worse than pigs and dogs, instead of speaking righteously to me. I'm just taking revenge if I have a grudge, that's all. How can commoners be compared to gentry? The young man retorted. Jiang Pengji was so angry that she almost laughed. She scolded him back. Did a donkey kick you in the head? The young man suddenly opened his eyes wide. He didn't expect Jiang Pengji to scold him so crudely. What was the difference between that and pointing at someone's nose and scolding them? This young Langjun is right. Zuda, you shouldn't confuse the truth just because commoners are cheap and gentry are precious. Although the young Langjun was reckless and impulsive, he was also a man of character. There was a reason for his actions, and he should be considerate. However, you've really crossed the line by scolding him so harshly. Zuda is thin-skinned. He can't stand such abuse. When the atmosphere was tense, a mellow laughter interrupted them. It was a little teasing. Jiang Pengji frowned and looked toward the direction of the sound. She saw a middle-aged man with gray hair and beard, but he didn't look old. He was hale and hearty, and his steps were light. When the man appeared, the young man's expression changed. He bowed to him and said respectfully, Master. Are you the young Langjun of Lu County Chief's family? The middle-aged man came to Jiang Pengji. His eyes seemed to have seen through everything. Jiang Pengji frowned. He said, You're indeed a dragon among men. You look extraordinary. Who are you? Jiang Pengji didn't even bother to pretend to be drunk because of the man. She looked at him with burning eyes. The young man, who was called Zuda, was dissatisfied with her arrogant behavior. His master was respected by everyone. When had he ever been stared at so rudely? Jiang Pengji's previous behavior left a bad impression on him. The young man hated her even more. The middle-aged man smiled kindly and raised his hand to stop the student. I thought you should know. I'm not talented, so people give me a nickname, Yuanjing. Yuanjing? Jiang Pengji's mouth twitched. She didn't expect to see the legendary master Yuanjing under such circumstances. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged man who had just finished soaking in the hot spring. He didn't seem to be as mysterious as the rumors said. Master Yuanjing laughed. He was quite optimistic. His eyes slightly curved like a crescent moon. In Shangjing, a piece of tile can kill 3 high officials. Young Lang Jun, you're a newborn calf that's not afraid of tigers. You can do anything. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue and said with a smile, no, you're wrong. I still have my concerns. Otherwise, these 2 people would have been killed on the spot. They wouldn't have just drunk a few mouthfuls of hot spring water. After that, she thought of something. Actually, according to what your student said, the gentry are more noble than the common people. But there are different levels among the gentry. Naturally, I'm more noble than these 2 people. They offended me, so no matter how I humiliate them, it shouldn't be wrong. The young man named Zuda was speechless. Chapter 270. That's a bunch of nonsense. The young man was enraged by Jiang Pengji's words. It was hard for him to maintain his elegant demeanor. Jiang Pengji snorted. She looked at Master Yuanjing and then at the young man named Zuda. She mocked, you said that I'm talking nonsense, but why don't you take a look at what's in your head? The sage said that the people are more important than the king. If the king is like this, how can the gentry be more important than the people? You said that I rely on my ancestors, but you can argue with me here because you have a good ancestor, right? Jiang Pengji did not like the young man named Zuda. She realized that not only did he have the heart of a saint, but he was also retarded. The young man was speechless. Jiang Pengji spoke again, but this time, she was not talking to the young man. She was asking Master Yuanjing. I thought that Master Yuanjing was famous, so he should be very careful when he accepted disciples. How could he be so old and blind that he accepted such an extreme and stubborn blockhead as his student? She did not hide her disdain for the young man when she said that. This time, the young man was so angry that he couldn't even speak a word. His face was flushed red. He did not care how Jiang Pengji attacked him, but he could not let her implicate his respected teacher. Master Yuanjing was not angry. Instead, he looked at Jiang Pengji meaningfully. Humans are not perfect. Even saints are like this, let alone ordinary people. As a teacher, you need to know that teaching is not discriminatory. Then you can teach, and solve doubts. Although Zuda is wrong, he has his merits. How can you just look at one side and deny everything about him? If what you said is true, Langyi Academy should be empty. I'm not a perfect teacher, and I'm not qualified to be a teacher. It was because of his shortcomings that he needed to learn. It would take more than 1 or 2 days to correct, not to mention a well-formed temperament. Master Yuanjing said calmly. There was even a smile on his face that made Jiang Pengji feel uncomfortable. If one had to describe his smile, it would be cunning. Master Yuanjing was respected by the people and the students. It was not only because he fought for the 3 cities from the royal court of the north borderline when he was young, nor was it because he was knowledgeable. More importantly, it was because he treated his students equally. Whether it was the son of a noble or the descendant of a peddler, in his eyes, a student was just a student. He would not look up to a student because he was outstanding or had a noble background, nor would he look down on a student because he was stubborn or had a lowly background. As long as their nature wasn't bad, their roots weren't rotten, and there was still room for improvement, then they were worthy of his careful guidance. Jiang Pengji said, "You're quite protective." Mr. Yuanjing said calmly, "Zuda's nature isn't bad. He's just a little paranoid, but he can still change." Jiang Pengji squinted her eyes and said, "Oh." She suddenly raised her hand and pointed at the two people who were still in the hot spring and did not dare to come out. "In your opinion, what do you think about these two people?" When she asked this question, many people who were watching the show pricked up their ears, and the person in question even had his heart in his throat. Being targeted by Lu Shi meant that they were not fated to be officials, but if Mr. Yuanjing praised them, there was still a chance. Mr. Yuanjing suddenly smiled. He raised his hand and stroked his gray beard. His eyes were a little bright. It was said that one's eyes could reflect one's true age. Mr. Yuanjing took good care of himself, but he still looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. His eyes were clear and bright, with a deep wisdom. It was impossible to guess his real age just by looking at his eyes. Mr. Yuanjing had seen people who held grudges and aggressive people, but it was rare to see someone like Jiang Pengji. He said, looking at his behavior, "He has a dignified appearance and is made of gold and jade. Looking at his inside, he has a belly full of rubbish and is rotten inside." "Are you satisfied with this answer, Lang Jun?" Lu Shi alone would not let the two young men have an easy time, but she dragged him into this mess. She was trying to push them to the edge of death. Really, she was evil, he thought. How could Mr. Yuanjing not see that he was being used by Jiang Pengji? But he did not like to be calculative with the younger generation, so he did not expose her. Mr. Yuanjing's evaluation was like a bolt from the blue to the two young men's ears. Although they were in the warm hot spring, they felt like they had fallen into an ice cellar. A terrifying chill spread from the soles of their feet to the top of their heads. Lu Shi had cut off their path to fame. Mr. Yuanjing's evaluation was enough to make them lose their footing in Dongqing. Jiang Pengji smiled with satisfaction. Her eyes were slightly curved like the bright crescent moon, which was similar to Mr. Yuanjing's. "I drank too much just now. Please forgive me if I offended you." Mr. Yuanjing shook his head helplessly. She was taking advantage of the old man's age, but he was not blind. He could see clearly whether Jiang Pengji was really drunk or pretending to be drunk. "It's okay. It's just that drinking hurts the liver. It's better for young people to drink less. Zuda, let's go." "I'm sorry, master. I was rude today, so you were put in a difficult position by a kid." After leaving the waterside pavilion, the young man named Zuda hung his head low like a rooster who had lost a fight. He was unhappy. Mr. Yuanjing folded his hands in his wide sleeves. His footsteps were leisurely as if he was taking a stroll in the park. "Zuda, look at that young Lang Jun. What do you think of him?" The young man turned his face away. He was still angry. "He has a sharp tongue and a bunch of crooked reasoning." Mr. Yuanjing did not comment. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What else?" The young man was speechless. He could not say anything else for a long time. Mr. Yuanjing sighed and said, "You were blinded by anger and resentment, which affected your judgment. This is a taboo for a strategist. You can't judge a person by his appearance. You have to observe his words and actions carefully. You have to find out the reason behind it. Otherwise, even if that young Lang Jun is a dragon among men, you won't be able to see him. Isn't it a pity?" He spoke calmly. His tone was like he was talking about family matters and not lecturing a student. The young man was not convinced. "Did you say that the young man is a dragon among men? Such a high evaluation?" Mr. Yuanjing stopped and turned his head to smile at the young man. "Not even 1 in a million." The young man was speechless. "It's just that this person is too stubborn and easy to break. His temper is so flamboyant. It's easy for him to get into trouble." Mr. Yuanjing pondered and sighed. He's like a piece of unpolished jade. Although he has natural beauty, he hasn't been carefully carved. People don't know his inner qualities, so they treat him like a stubborn stone. More importantly, she had the mandate of an emperor, but she was a girl. Mr. Yuanjing secretly raised his eyebrows when he thought about that. The old man was not blind. He could tell if Jiang Pengji was a boy or a girl. Since Mr. Yuanjing was so sure about Jiang Pengji, the young man could calm down no matter how unconvinced he was. He looked at her objectively. He muttered and felt slightly wronged. I'm blind. I only see that this person is arrogant and bullying the weak. Mr. Yuanjing smiled like a naughty child and teased him. So, I'm your teacher, and you're my student. The young man was speechless. Chapter 271. Since Master Yuanjing was bringing a few students with him, the hot spring that he had requested was very big. There was even a smaller companion spring inside. There was a pavilion, a terrace, and a waterside pavilion. It was enough for the master and his students to have fun. This was also the most luxurious private room in the hot spring hotel. If he wasn't Master Yuanjing, who was famous in Dongqing, he wouldn't have been able to get such a good room. Zuda accompanied Master Yuanjing back. When he was about to open the door for the master, he saw Master Yuanjing wave his hand with a playful expression. Listen, is there anything strange? The young man, Zuda, was confused. They didn't go to the wrong room. Why was the master keeping them in suspense? Master, what's wrong? Master Yuanjing smiled and said, usually, they follow the rules and etiquette, but they like to play around in private. When I'm not here, how can it be so peaceful if they don't play around? Therefore, there should be a distinguished guest. Zuda, what do you think of my appearance? The young man choked and then said seriously, Master, you are handsome and spirited. You don't lose to the young people. Master Yuanjing nodded in agreement and said, I think so too. The young man was speechless. He opened the door with the air of a knowledgeable scholar. His clear eyes scanned the inner room and he understood. He saw the person he expected and said, I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been, Chief Lu? Because of Gu Min, the Lu residents and Master Yuanjing had some connections. The two families had contact with each other. Even though Gu Min had passed away many years ago, the second wife didn't forget to send gifts to Master Yuanjing during festivals. The two families had a good relationship. The distinguished guest that Master Yuanjing mentioned was no doubt Lu Shi. As for Fengren, he was just there to join in the fun. The teacher secretly glanced at a few of his students. They were well behaved because Lu Shi and Fengren were there. Each of them was acting like a gentleman. One of them was reciting, two of them were competing, or three of them were discussing poetry collections in secret, whispering to each other. They were quite good at bluffing. Lu Shi had been waiting for a while. When he saw Master Yuanjing finally appear, he couldn't help but feel relieved. To be honest, this hot spring room was poisonous. Any student who mentioned it seemed to be famous in history or unofficial history. He felt a little pressured. He went forward to greet Master Yuanjing, and the two of them sat down. Before Lu Shi could speak, Master Yuanjing said, I know why you're here, County Chief Lu. Lu Shi opened his mouth and swallowed the polite words he wanted to say to warm up the situation. He asked, since that's the case, what do you think? The other students seemed to be very serious, but in fact, all of them pricked up their ears to listen to the purpose of County Chief Lu's visit. I have said before that I will accept 4 people as my disciples according to fate. A while ago, I had already accepted a filial disciple. 4 people have reached the age limit, so I will not accept any more disciples. Your son is a dragon among men. If you don't mind Langyi Academy, you can come and study here. You are most welcome. Master Yuanjing shook his head, but he did not look regretful. Moreover, even without Zixiao, your Lang Jun and I are not fated to be master and disciple. Lu Shi felt a little annoyed. He hadn't said anything yet, but the old man in front of him had already said everything he could. However, he didn't force it. His initial plan was to go to Langi Academy and leave everything else to fate. Now, it could be said that his wish had been fulfilled. That's good. Then I'll temporarily entrust this mischievous son of mine to Mr. I hope Mr. will take good care of him. Master Yuanjing said half-truthfully, your son is full of anger. If I don't take care of him, my Langi Academy will be overturned. Lu Shi's facial expression changed slightly when he heard that. If others heard Master Yuanjing's words, they would definitely think that Master Yuanjing despised Lu Shi's son for being naughty or difficult to discipline. But Lu Shi understood what Master Yuanjing was implying. Master Yuanjing and Master Liaochen seemed to be able to see that Lanting's fate was extraordinary. Master Liaochen once said that there were less than 5 people in the 5 kingdoms who could see the emperor's aura around Jiangpengji. However, his daughter seemed to be unlucky. Not only did she meet Master Liaochen, but she also met Master Yuanjing. I am not a talkative person. You can rest assured, County Chief Lu. Master Yuanjing saw through Jiangpengji's physiognomy, but he did not expose her. Instead, he quietly covered up for her. It was obvious that he did not have the same opinion as others. According to the scholar's point of view, a woman with the emperor's fate was a demoness who brought disaster to the country. At their level, they had already broken away from the restrictions that ordinary people had. Otherwise, how could they be called masters? Many times, even if they saw something, they would keep quiet. Lu Shi forced a smile. If Lanting is really so naughty and overturns your academy, the Lus will help you rebuild the academy even if we have to spend all our fortune. Master Yuanjing stroked his beard and said, County Chief Lu, I am looking forward to it. Lu Shi was speechless. Looking forward to it? At that moment, Master Yuanjing added, the roof of the east wing was blown open by the strong wind last time. The students are not good at repairing it, but it still leaks every rainy day. If you really help the academy rebuild it, the children will not have to climb up the roof. Lu Shi was speechless. I can't believe you are this kind of Master Yuanjing. In Lu Shi's mind, Master Yuanjing should be as bright as the moon. He should be a noble person who was hard to get in touch with. Now that he met him, how should he put it, it felt like his idol had been shattered. It seemed that Master Yuanjing was too down-to-earth. Feng Ren, who was beside Lu Shi, was also stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. No one would have thought that Master Yuanjing, who was said to be otherworldly, was like an old child in reality. If that's the case, I will go and call my son here so that you can take a look at him. Master Yuanjing smiled and said, there is no hurry. I have just seen the little Lang Jun outside. He is indeed a bright and healthy child. There is no need to trouble you, County Chief Lu. I will let my students run errands for you. Why don't you play a game with an old man like me? For some reason, when Lu Shi heard Master Yuanjing talk about his daughter like that, he suddenly felt uneasy. It was understandable that he had a bright and clean face, but where did he see that he was healthy and healthy? Not only was Lu Shi confused, but the young man from Zuda University who followed Master Yuanjing was also confused. How could that rude teenager be the Lang Jun of County Chief Lu? Then I will have to trouble you. Lu Shi looked calm, but he felt a little uneasy. He felt that his daughter was stirring up trouble again. Zuda, go and make the arrangements. I will have a game with County Chief Lu. Everyone knew that Master Yuanjing was proficient in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. But his students knew that Master Yuanjing loved to play chess. He would often play chess and entertain himself for the whole night. Master Yuanjing held a black chess piece with his back facing the door. It was as if he had eyes on the back of his head. He said to the young man who had just crossed the door, "Zixiao, go and call for the number 3 Tianzi room in the Fanghe courtyard. Tell her that the little Langjuan's father wants her to come here." The young man seemed to have just finished bathing. His black hair was wet and his shoulders were wet. Hearing his master's order, he didn't doubt it. He lowered his eyes and agreed. That little friend is also Master Yuanjing's student? Lu Shi looked up and almost threw the chess piece. He even forgot to ask a question. Chapter 272. Master Yuanjing smiled and asked Lu Shi, "You mean Zixiao? I took him in a while ago, so it can be said that I have made up for my regret." By the time he finished speaking, the young man had already turned around and left, leaving behind only a slightly thin and tall silhouette. Lu Shi's eyes widened as if he had thought of something. After a long while, he said in a low voice, "So, he is Mr.'s 4th disciple. His appearance is indeed extraordinary." Although he said that, he was secretly suspicious. When did Wei Zixiao become Yuan Jing's disciple? He was bewildered, and his eyes darkened. Wei Ci was from Lengjia and was also studying in Lengjia. However, due to the changes in his family, he left Dongqing with his entire family. Master Yuanjing squinted his eyes. His cold gaze seemed to have seen through everything. Seeing Lu Shi's reaction, he said meaningfully, "Originally, I couldn't have accepted this disciple. Although we were destined to be master and disciple, we were not master and disciple." Lu Shi's hand that was holding the chess piece paused. His face was filled with curiosity and suspicion. "If that's the case, why did you accept him as your disciple? You don't know this, but Zixiao has a knot in his heart. This also causes him to be intelligent, but he also likes to get into a dead end. If he's not careful, he'll step onto the wrong path. In the past, I wanted to take him as my disciple twice, but he refused both times. Now that he is willing to be enlightened, I am naturally overjoyed." To Yuan Jing, there was nothing more gratifying than seeing a promising seedling untie the knot in his heart and grow strong and healthy. Lu Shi was completely dumbfounded, as if he had just heard a heavenly book. There had always been others chasing after Yuan Jing to be his disciple. How could there be someone who could make Yuan Jing chase after him? Wei Ci. Min only said that he was a good strategist. Simply put, they were the prettiest among the smart and the smartest among the beauties. This was a man who used his face to brush official history, and his schemes only appeared in unofficial history books. So, Master Yuanjing, are you sure you're not joking? To be loved by Mr. so much, he must not be weak in any aspect. Lu Shi tried his best to maintain his composure so that he would not reveal any flaws. Of course. Zixiao, it's IKEA. Lu Shi and Feng Ren, who was watching the game, were speechless. Wait, IKEA? IKEA? Are you sure there's nothing wrong with this description? Dong dong dong, Jiang Pengji was lazily soaking in the hot spring. A neatly folded towel rested on her forehead. Her long black hair was fixed at the top of her head with a hairpin, revealing her slender and fair neck. Her skin was covered with water droplets. Because of the fog, it was as if she had a filter on her entire body. Although she was still wearing clothes, the audience in the live broadcast room expressed that they could not take it anymore. Sugar-fried chestnuts, #perverted. I really want to climb in and have a bath with the streamer. Streamer Zhengzheng Shangwa, there are always unruly people who want to compete with me for the streamer. Hearing the knock on the door, Jiang Pengji opened her tipsy eyes. There was a faint blush on her face from the steam, as if she had applied a layer of top-notch powder on it. Did the maidservant bring the wine? She raised her eyebrows and said lazily. Come in. Just leave the wine by the side of the pool. Outside the house, Wei Ci, who had obtained permission, opened the door slightly. Hot and humid air blew into his face, and his vision was filled with white mist. The audience in the streaming room was the first to notice the abnormality. At that moment, Jiang Pengji was still lazily half-lidded. One chestnut, host, stop sleeping. There's a strange man coming in. Be careful. Lo Siji Lianmeng, it's a man, not a maidservant. Host, don't sleep over. Be careful not to be taken advantage of. Wei Feng Tang Tang, host, stop sleeping. Get up quickly. Someone reminded Jiang Pengji. Naturally, there were also people who noticed the strange man's appearance. But in a flash, the bullet screen full of infatuated fans covered all the reminders. It was an unprecedented grand occasion. Looking at the changes in the bullet screen, Jiang Pengji frowned slightly. She did not need to turn her head to guess the person's magnificent appearance. The audience in the streaming room did not have any other good points, but they had a normal sense of beauty. Not every beautiful face could make them lick the screen. You seem to have entered the wrong door. Jiang Pengji said without turning her head. She supported herself with both arms by the side of the pool and relaxed her whole body. The strange man outside did not come in. Instead, he lowered his head and spoke in a low voice. His voice was between a teenager and an adult. I am Wei Ci. Your father has summoned you to Tianzi room number 1 in the Rose Garden. Hearing that, Jiang Pengji suddenly turned her head to look at the man. She asked, Are you talking about my father? Wei Ci's body stiffened imperceptibly. He suddenly lowered his head and immediately returned to normal. It was as if the abnormality had never occurred. He said with certainty, Yes, your father is playing chess with my master. He specially ordered me to come over and pass on the message. Jiang Pengji secretly rubbed the area between her eyebrows. Although it was very comfortable to soak in the hot spring, one could not soak in it for too long. Why are you so reserved, Lang Jun? Wait a moment. I will go with you after I tidy up. It's okay. Help yourself. The next second, the door closed again. There was a vague shadow at the door. It was obvious that the person had not left. Seeing that, Jiang Pengji frowned but did not say anything. Climbing out of the hot spring, she temporarily closed the streaming room. After a simple wipe, she changed into a dry robe. After doing all that, she reopened the streaming room and pushed open the paper door at the same time. She said to Wei Ci, who was kneeling at the door, Please lead the way, Lang Jun. At that moment, without the cover of the fog, Wei Ci's appearance was clearly visible to her. Seeing him in person, she could understand why the look-alike person in the streaming room was so excited. His long, black hair was warm and damp. It draped over his shoulders, leaving wet marks. The ends of his hair were dripping with water droplets. His face was like jade and his skin was like fine porcelain. Because of the heat, his cheeks were a little flushed, giving people a slightly intoxicated feeling. His hair was like a knife, his eyebrows were like ink, and his pure black eyes were cold and calm. When he looked at Jiang Pengji, he did not reveal the slightest emotion. It was as if he had emptied his mind. Not to mention anything else, just this alone made Jiang Pengji feel that it was interesting. It seemed that she had just met this young man for the first time. Why did he have such a high level of vigilance against her? Her eyes turned and a plan came to her mind. Jiang Pengji knelt on one knee and moved slightly closer to the young man. Her pair of eyes that seemed calm could not help but ripple. If it wasn't for the fact that you have an Adam's apple and don't have ear piercings, would have thought that you were a young lady. You actually came to the hot spring alone. Wei Ci's face was cold. He leaned back slightly and distanced himself from Jiang Pengji. He frowned slightly in displeasure. Young Lang Jun, this joke is a little too much. I don't like people talking about my appearance for fun. Jiang Pengji stood up and crossed her arms in front of her chest. I was obviously praising you for your good looks. Wuxia pursed his lips tightly and stood up to lead the way. He said coldly, I am a man. It is really rude to compare me with a woman. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Oh, he has quite a temper. Lanting? A familiar yet slightly doubtful voice interjected. Chapter 273. TSK, I was wondering who it was. So it's the famous Fenger Langjun. It's really easy to find traces of you. Jiang Pengji walked to the side of the corridor, which was separated from Feng Jin by a pond. The two of them conversed through the air. Feng Jin felt wronged. He did not know that Jiang Pengji would be in Shangjing at that time. If he had known earlier, he definitely wouldn't have come out to soak in the spring with his classmates. Just now, when he was leaning against the railing and looking into the distance, he suddenly saw a familiar figure. He thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he didn't expect that it was really his friend. I haven't seen you in a few months. Lanting's glib tongue has only increased. You're able to pin a groundless crime on me without any hesitation. Feng Jin smiled. At that moment, a classmate beside him called out to him. Feng Jin apologetically said to Jiang Pengji, Lanting, please don't blame me. We'll catch up later. After Jiang Pengji greeted him, she realized that Wuxia was looking coldly at Feng Jin's back as he turned around. I just met an acquaintance. Wei Langjun, please lead the way. Wuxia withdrew his gaze and did not say a word. One after the other, they soon arrived at the Rose Courtyard Sky Room 1. Lanting, come here. This is Master Yuanjing. In the future, when you learn from teacher, you must remember not to be naughty and mischievous. Lu Shi's chess skills were not bad, but compared to Master Yuanjing, he was still lacking. So, he lost without feeling depressed or embarrassed. By the time Wuxia brought him over, the chessboard had already lost its momentum. Lu Shi decided to divert his attention. Master Yuanjing said to Jiang Pengji, little friend, we meet again. Hello, sir. She greeted him obediently and said to Lu Shi, don't worry, father. I know. At this moment, Wuxia, who was talking to his classmate in a low voice, glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, then quietly shifted his gaze. Master Yuanjing was addicted to chess. How could it be enough to defeat Lu Shi? I'll call you Lanting. He shifted his gaze to Jiang Pengji and asked, will you play a game with me? As you wish. Jiang Pengji did not know how to play chess, but Lu Shi had learned it before. Although his chess skills were not very good, his basic skills were very solid. She, who had inherited Lu Shi's memories, naturally knew how to play chess. The opening was a little miserable. Feng Ren and Lu Shi, the two observers, couldn't stand it anymore. They wanted to roll up their sleeves and play the game themselves. Lu Shi was even more suspicious. His daughter's chess skills were not that bad. How did Wei Yuan teach him? Unexpectedly, Master Yuanjing acted like a beginner. He placed his chess pieces randomly, and no one could figure out what he was planning. As a player, Jiang Pengji understood that the other party was intentionally guiding her. Jiang Pengji couldn't help but be more serious about the game. She went through Lu Shi's memories in detail in her mind. After familiarizing herself with the game, she used her own method to calculate. The speed at which she placed the chess pieces became slower and slower. In the end, she had to think for half a cup of tea before she placed a chess piece. At that moment, Master Yuanjing suddenly smiled. The game of chess had finally begun. Master Yuanjing looked at the chessboard and smiled. I've won this round. Jiang Pengji pursed her lips so tightly that they almost formed a straight line. There was still some heat in her eyes. One more round. No more, no more. Master Yuan Jing shook his head and looked a little tired. I'm already old. How can I compete with young people in terms of energy? Lanting, if you still want to play chess, Zixiao is the best among all of us. You can play 2 rounds with him. Jiang Pengji frowned and looked at Wei Ci. Wei Ci narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, I'm not feeling well. It's not convenient for me to play with you. Jiang Pengji was speechless. She didn't do anything to him, did she? Why is he so angry? Not only was Jiang Pengji surprised, but Wei Ci's classmates who were close to him were also confused. What's wrong with Zixiao today? Why do I feel like he's a different person? You think so too? Did that Lu Xiao Langjun unintentionally make fun of his appearance? Although in this day and age, the beauty standard of men was based on gentleness, the more feminine, the better. Their bodies were delicate and soft, and they would be blown away by the wind. There were some people who hated that kind of atmosphere. Wei Ci was one of them. He hated being treated as a woman, and he hated it even more when others made a fuss about his appearance. If Lu Shi violated this taboo and was treated coldly by Wei Ci, it seemed to make sense. Jiang Pengji's hearing was amazing. Naturally, she didn't miss the discussion. She was also confused. At most, he just said that he was good-looking. Did he have to be so angry? However, she wasn't a credit, nor was she gold or silver. She couldn't expect everyone to like her. If Wei Ci didn't like her, so be it. It wasn't like she would lose a piece of flesh. Jiang Pengji soon forgot about this detail. She sat quietly at the side and watched the others play. Lu Shi, Feng Ren, and the other elders were also sensible. They knew that their presence would make the others feel uncomfortable, so they simply found an excuse to leave. However, before Lu Shi left, he winked at his daughter. Don't give yourself away, my daughter. Do you know how to play the drinking game? Jiang Pengji was young. The others were either in their 20s or about the same age. She, a teenager, sat quietly in the corner and watched the others play and talk. No matter how one looked at it, the scene was a little sad and pitiful. Therefore, someone took the initiative to talk to her. She was silent for a while, then said, I know how to drink. Huh, you're still young. You only took a few sips of wine. How can you say that you know how to drink? The other party smiled and patted her shoulder as if they were close friends. We'll be classmates from now on. When you arrive at the academy, if anyone makes things difficult for you, just tell them my name. She listened and nodded shyly. Her big, watery eyes were wide open. If a screenshot was taken, it could probably be named Jiang Pengji's Cleverness JPG. The drinking game was originally an activity to liven things up during banquets. Jiang Pengji also knew some of the rules. All the youths present were top students. Even if a few of them weren't that great, they were the type that could make up for their inadequacies with hard work. When they played the drinking game, the content was naturally as difficult as possible. Poems, songs, and essays were all over the place. There were also obscure geographical knowledge, unofficial history, and biographies. In short, although they couldn't understand it, they always felt that it was awesome. After an hour, Jiang Pengji's brain was stuffed with words. She rested her chin on her hand and looked indifferent. She felt someone was approaching her. She turned her head and saw Wei Ci, who had a bad temper, push a tray toward her. There were all kinds of dried fruits and snacks on the tray. He looked down and avoided Jiang Pengji's sight. Jiang Pengji was surprised and asked, Did I offend you in any way? Wei Ci didn't answer her question. I heard Wenbin mention you a few days ago. Jiang Pengji was stunned. She suddenly remembered the words she used to fool Han Yu. She used to fool Han Yu by saying that she had seen Cheng Jing and Wei Ci in her dream. She even described Wei Ci as beautiful. Was it because of that? She coughed awkwardly and said with a lack of confidence, "It was just a misunderstanding. I used it to fool him." Sure enough, a lie needed several lies to cover up the loophole. Wei Si said calmly, "It's okay. Since you didn't mean it, I won't hold it against you." Jiang Pengji secretly squinted her eyes. A glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. It would have been better if Wei Si didn't explain. The more he explained, the more she felt that he was trying to hide something. Chapter 274. Wei Si looked at Jiang Pengji's side profile, and his heart was filled with complicated feelings. She was like a savage, bloodthirsty, and ferocious beast that lived on human flesh staring at his fragile neck. Her snow-white teeth had some minced meat on them, and saliva was dripping from them. He could smell the stench coming from the tip of his nose. The shadow of death shrouded him. He thought he was going to die, but in the next second, she turned into a palm-sized white cat and meowed at him in a cute and crisp manner. It was probably an illusion. "But why do I always feel that you are deliberately guarding against me? Do I eat people like a Rakshasa?" Jiang Pengji held her cheeks in puzzlement. Her lips curled into a faint smile, and she asked him innocently. Of course, it was only an illusion. Wei Si gathered his thoughts. His nerves were tense, as if he was facing a formidable enemy, but he calmly narrated on the surface. "Little Lang Jun, you misunderstood me. When did I deliberately guard against you? Si and Lang Jun are not familiar with each other, so I should keep my distance." Jiang Pengji squinted her eyes and suddenly moved closer to him. Wei Si's reaction was also very interesting. He was like a frightened rabbit. She sneered in her heart when she saw him suddenly lean back. Instead of retreating, she moved closer to Wei Si and whispered in his ear. They were so close, but she could clearly feel the trembling of his body. That kind of fear and panic, which could not be controlled by reason, made her more curious. "Wei Zixiao." Jiang Pengji deliberately pretended to be innocent and restored her previous cold and serious tone. She said, "I don't know why you are so guarded against me, and even afraid of me like a snake, but I hope you understand that the more you act so clearly, the more it arouses my curiosity and desire to investigate. So, are you avoiding me, or are you playing hard to get?" It was unknown which sentence provoked Wei Si, but his reaction was about to explode. Dong, the movement in the corner attracted the attention of others. They saw a young person single-handedly holding Wei Si's hands. His expression was cold and his eyes were fierce. On the other hand, the restrained Wei Si was lying on the ground in a slightly embarrassed state. Perhaps because of the struggle or something else, his cheeks were dyed red. With a plop, a student sitting by the hot spring saw the scene and was so shocked that he dropped the fruit plate in his hand. What happened?" "Sorry, I'm just messing around. You guys continue." Jiang Pengji smiled as if there was no one around. She changed her posture from a half-kneeling position to a kneeling position. She raised her hand and released the hand that was restraining Wei Si's wrist. Those with better eyesight could clearly see the faint finger marks left on Wei Si's wrist. They were playing a little too hard. Wei Si's chest heaved up and down rapidly. His facial expression was a few degrees below zero. He looked at Jiang Pengji with bloodshot eyes. "You tried to push me away just now. I instinctively thought you were going to attack me, so," spreading out her hands, Jiang Pengji had a look that said, "This is not my fault." Wei Si pursed his lips tightly and did not say a word for a while. Wei Si propped himself up from the ground and ignored the words of concern from the people around him. He strode out of the hot spring room. As long as one was not blind, anyone could see the huge words on Wei Si's back, "I'm angry." The culprit who provoked Wei Si, Jiang Pengji, was dumbfounded. She did not want to take the blame. She did not want to offend Wei Si. After all, he was one of Master Yuanjing's 4 disciples. He had his own connections in Langyi Academy. He was a bully that could not be offended. She wanted to go to school, not to fight. Why would she provoke Wei Ci for no reason? However, the current situation was that she did not want to offend Wei Ci. Wei Ci came up to her and made her offend him. In the end, he even put the blame on her. What af** king injustice? Oh, you're the little princess. You have the final say. The audience in the streaming room was rather disappointed. They thought the streamer was going to live stream driving. They did not expect that she would not even drive a toy car. Nide Yida, #perverted. Just now, the streamer confined him to the ground with one hand. I thought she was going to drive. Streamer Xingjing Shanghua, I used to think that the domineering CEO was very cliché. But now I understand why such a cliché is popular. It's entirely because at the moment when you're pinned against the wall, you feel the thrill of being conquered. Streamer Xijing Shanghua, streamer, shouldn't that be called Dong? If she stood against the wall, she would probably only hit her chest. Looking at the discussion of the audience in the streaming room, Jiang Pengji could not help but have an illusion. She bullied the little princess. But the problem was that she was really not that crazy. Not only did the audience in the streaming room think so, but even the audience who were watching the live broadcast thought so. Although Zixiao is born beautiful, he is a real man. The person who had tried to get close to Jiang Pengji came over. It was unknown whether he was gloating or something else. Although we have many sworn brothers now, you are still a little young at your age. After he finished speaking, he raised his eyebrows at her and gave her a look that all men understood. Jiang Pengji's face darkened after she heard that. Wei Ci left the hot spring room. The cold wind outside blew and cleared his feverish mind. Just as Jiang Pengji said, if he behaved as usual and did not reveal any abnormalities, the other party would probably not even look at him. That was exactly what he wanted. But he was not mentally prepared. He showed an abnormality and attracted the other party's attention. The current situation was the complete opposite of his original plan. He stood in the corridor in a daze. The bright white moon in the sky was reflected on the pond. The scenery was pleasant and it made his state of mind slightly calm. Now that he had calmed down, he did not intend to go back. He was afraid that he would give himself away again. Only God knew that what Jiang Pengji said just now scared him to the point that all the hair on his body stood on end. He was almost scared out of his wits. Forget it, forget it. I will treat her as usual. Wei Ci calmed down for a while and gave himself enough psychological hints. Only when he felt that he could face Jiang Pengji normally did he turn around and return to the hot spring room. Just as he opened the door, he saw that there was no one inside. There were some liquor tags scattered on the low table. He looked at the empty hot spring room and was stunned. Where is she? She went to cause trouble. Jiang Pengji felt that there were a lot of things to do today. She did not soak in the hot spring much, but she encountered a lot of annoying things. Especially after she was wronged by the little princess, Wei Ci. Something came to her door immediately after. This time, it was her friend, Feng Jin, who called for help from outside. When she arrived, the matter was already a little out of hand. Feng Jin, who was originally elegant and graceful, looked angry. His face was covered with bruises. The bruises on his white jade-like face were very eye-catching. Feng Jin was the second legitimate son of the head of the secretariat, Feng Run. Who had the guts to hit him and even hit his face? Jiang Pengji saw that not only was Feng Jin's face injured, but his arm was also cut by a knife. Half of his arm was almost dyed red. She was furious. Chapter 275. Feng Jin was grimacing in pain, but when he heard Jiang Pengji's arrogant declaration, his hands stopped hurting, but his stomach hurt. If they were in Hejian County, it would be fine for her to be so arrogant. At least Lu Shi could handle it. But now, they were in Shangjing, where the emperor was. She did not have the advantage of being a local snake, but she could still be so arrogant. Thinking of his humility just now, in exchange for such humiliation and a knife to his arm, he suddenly felt that it was better to be arrogant. Lanting, be careful. These people are not friendly. Feng Jin covered his wound with his left hand. Blood kept flowing out from between his fingers. His face was pale because of the pain and blood loss. Even his voice was very weak. Messengers from the royal family of the northern borderline, Jiang Pengji looked at the few strong men who were confronting the people in the courtyard. Each of them had small braids of black hair and a floral scarf on their heads. Their thick eyebrows slanted to the temples, and their faces were deep and well-defined. She could tell at a glance that they were foreigners. They were naked from the waist up. There were strange and complicated tattoos on their shoulders and chests. One could vaguely see that they were ferocious beasts. Their muscles bulged like stones, and one of their arms was thicker than Feng Jin's thigh. Their skin was oiled and could even reflect light. Oh, messengers from the royal family of the northern borderline? Jiang Pengji sneered coldly and took 2 steps forward. The crowd automatically made way for her. Feng Jin, you've lived like a dog, haven't you? You're the son of the head of the secretariat, and you're being bullied like this? They're just watchdogs. They're not the descendants of the royal family of the northern borderline, and you're beaten up like this. You're a disgrace to your father. Feng Jin's expression changed. He was not angry at Jiang Pengji's harsh words, but it was the truth. The son of the head of the secretariat was beaten up in the hot spring house under Prince Changshuo's name, and his important right arm was also injured. Because of this injury, it was very likely that he would not be able to participate in the assessment in a few days. Who are you calling watchdogs? Jiang Pengji stood in front of Feng Jin and looked at the person who spoke. Some of the other students were watching, and some wanted to go forward to help, but they did not bring any weapons. Just by comparing their size, how could they be a match for the strong men who were holding knives? Feng Jin was the unluckiest. Not only did he hurt his arm, but he was also slapped in the face. The rest of them had messy clothes and occasional scratches. TSK, he's scolding the dog that stole his sister-in-law. It was as if Jiang Pengji had eaten gunpowder. She was in a bad mood. Now that someone was asking for a beating in front of her, she naturally rebuked him without holding back. Don't people in the north borderline have different levels? Apart from the royal family, everyone else was second-class trash. Calling you watchdogs is a compliment to show the friendship between our two countries. Feng Jin had never seen such a shrewish Jiang Pengji. He was so shocked that he forgot about the pain. Those rough men were also choked by Jiang Pengji's scolding. The leader looked fierce, but he was not good with words. They felt that those scholars were weak and only knew how to mutter. Their legs added together were not even as thick as one of their arms. It was a sensitive period. Even if they humiliated these people, the Dongqing royal family would not do anything to them. Who did you say had an affair with sister-in-law? A trace of panic flashed across the leader's face. He took a step forward with his knife and instantly closed the distance between him and Jiang Pengji. He threatened her fiercely. Jiang Pengji laughed and grinned, showing her white teeth. You also stole your father's concubine. Feng Jin knew that Jiang Pengji would not speak without a reason. What she said was probably true. Otherwise, the strong man would not have reacted so fiercely. Suddenly, he could not help but think of the night in the bandits' village, when Jiang Pengji exposed his background. Huayu, which dog hurt you? Jiang Pengji did not care about the strong men in front of her at all. If they were not happy, she would fight. She would not lose in an argument, let alone in a fight. Lanting, Dongqing is a land of etiquette. Feng Jin secretly smiled bitterly. Oh yes, the one who hit me was the one with the green headscarf. He felt that Jiang Pengji's words were very cool, but he also had to pay attention to the influence between the two countries. However, his friend was willing to stand up for him, so he could not refuse her kindness. Speak the human language to people because people can understand the human language. Speak the dog language to dogs because dogs can't understand the human language. Look, if you speak the human language to them, they can't understand. But if I speak to them like that, can't they understand? Jiang Pengji snorted. When dealing with foreign friends, you should change accordingly and actively eliminate the language barrier. That is the correct way of diplomacy. Everyone knew that Jiang Pengji was bullshitting, but some people felt that they had been brainwashed. This kind of fallacious reasoning seemed to be quite interesting. The strong men from the northern borderline were there to pick a fight. Originally, they were quite happy to bully the weak scholars, but when they met Jiang Pengji, who was so eloquent, they suddenly became angry. If they could not win in an argument, then they would fight. Anyway, it would be fine as long as no one died. Dongqing had been emphasizing culture and restraining martial arts for many years. The men at the border of the northern borderline were considered to be unyielding men, but after they entered Dongqing, all the men they saw were sissies with flowers in their hair and powder in their hair. Occasionally, there were a few normal men, but they did not use their limbs. They could pat their chests and say that the white chickens in the courtyard were not enough for them to chop, let alone the short man in front of them. As it turned out, they seemed to have met a fake sissy, but a real Hercules. Bang! Jiang Pengji's body was thin and small, so she had the advantage of dexterity. Her strength and appearance had nothing to do with each other. They thought they could take her down with a raise of their hands, but they did not expect her to be more slippery than a loach. She snatched the blade from one of the men's hands with her bare hands and pinched the man's wrist with 2 fingers. Not only did she force the man to let go of the blade, but at the same time, she turned around and got close to the man's chest. She pulled the man's body forward, and with her other elbow, she struck the man's Adam's apple. In a flash, she caught the handle of the blade that the man had let go of. At the same time, she twisted her body and kneed the man. Those with sensitive ears could even hear the sound of a sack bursting and liquid splattering. Everyone was speechless. Wait, that position, Feng Jin was so scared that he took a step back. His legs were faintly trembling. Jiang Pengji used the strong man's body as a shield to block the knife that was aimed at her back. She turned her wrist and the blade turned in another direction. It was as if she had eyes on the back of her head. The blade moved agilely in front of the ambusher's eyes. Suddenly, blood splattered, and it hurt people's eyes. That was not all. After she dropped the shield, her fingers became claws and strangled the man's throat. She pulled him down and threw him to the ground. Not only did his face hit the ground, but the force of Jiang Pengji's fall made his face a bloody mess. It was clearly a dozen strong men ganging up on one person, but looking at the situation on the battlefield, it looked like Jiang Pengji ganging up on a group of people. Feng Jin knew that Jiang Pengji could fight, but he did not know that she could fight to this extent. Those strong men were well-trained warriors of the northern borderline. They were few in number, but on the battlefield, they were like a human head harvester. Tell me, which dog's paw hurt Huayu? Chapter 276. Jiang Pengji basically showed no mercy. Although they were still alive, they were basically crippled. According to the customs of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, the fate of these handicapped people was to be abandoned and thrown into the wilderness to fight for their lives with wild beasts. In the northern border where resources were scarce and the environment was harsh, this was a fate worse than death. Not answering? Fine, I'll chop off both arms. After saying that, the broadsword in her hand was already thirsty. At this moment, the sound of armor clashing and a series of heavy footsteps came from outside the courtyard. Wait! Jiang Pengji sneered in her heart. She would lose face if he told her to slow down. In the end, he was a step too late. He raised his hand and the blade fell. A bloody arm was chopped off. Jiang Pengji raised her head and looked out of the courtyard coldly. 2 rows of armored soldiers from the northern borderline ran in, all carrying shiny weapons in their hands. Each of them was murderous, and the aura around them was like that of a dormant ferocious beast. Their imposing manner gave people a very oppressive feeling. A man dressed in northern borderline attire came out of the crowd. Looking at the northern borderline warriors lying on the ground, his face darkened. I used my own abilities to kill people, why should I stop? Jiang Pengji removed her foot from his face and kicked him away. She stared at him coldly. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for speaking too slowly. How can you blame me for acting too quickly? She struck first, not giving the other party a chance to question her. This is Dongqing, not the barbaric and uncivilized northern borderline. If you don't want to abide by the rules, get lost. Since you want to negotiate with the royal family through marriage, please show your sincerity. Jiang Pengji had beaten him up and chopped off his arm in front of him. The situation was already beyond redemption. At the end of the day, they were standing up for him. How could Feng Jin drag them down at this time? He panted and endured the severe pain in his arm. With a pale face, he said, seriously injuring the son of an important minister and humiliating the young students of Dongqing, is this the sincerity of your court in the peace talks? Today's matter cannot end so easily. Your northern borderline must give us an explanation. If these people were fooling around with ordinary people or poor disciples, Dongqing would have to swallow it no matter how unhappy they were. After all, they had to focus on the big picture. But what was the result? Among the crowd, Feng Jin was the most severely injured. He was the second legitimate son of the Feng family, one of the 4 noble families in Dongqing, and the son of Feng Ren, the head of the secretariat. If the bruises on his face were not applied with good ointment, it would probably take at least 10 days to half a month to disappear. Apart from that, his right arm was also cut by a knife. Blood kept flowing out. The injury to his right arm meant that he could not write, which would affect the upcoming assessment. In order to be in the limelight during the assessment, which student didn't put in great effort? If Feng Jin missed this assessment, all his previous efforts would be in vain. Even the plans he had made early in the morning would be disrupted. Who would compensate for such a huge loss? Feng Jin had suffered so much. Was he willing to be beaten up for nothing? Would Feng Ren let it go? Would the Feng clan let this go? For a prestigious landowning household that had existed for more than 1,000 years, they could lose their lives, but they could not afford to lose their face. Seeing that Jiang Pengji and Feng Jin were echoing each other with an arrogant attitude, the face of the man from the northern borderline who led the troops over also stiffened. Jiang Pengji added fuel to the fire and took the opportunity to add another sentence. If you have no intention of negotiating, you should make it clear as soon as possible. Today, you deliberately humiliated the son of an important official in the court. This matter must be reported to the officials. Instead of glaring at me here, why don't you go back and ask your master how to settle this matter? The other party was irritated by Jiang Pengji, and a lot of anger had accumulated in his stomach. A few warriors from the northern borderline were looking for trouble. Originally, they were secretly instructed by someone. Even if they hurt someone, they were not afraid. When the time came, someone would naturally come out to support them. Dongqing was used to being weak. Even if it was for the sake of the overall situation, they had to swallow the loss this time. However, They never expected that the warriors from the northern borderline who came to look for trouble would not only bully others but be pressed to the ground and trampled on. The man from the northern borderline was the general of the northern borderline who escorted the princess. He had some status and prestige among the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. He should have led his troops over arrogantly with the intention of denouncing them, but now he was put in a difficult position by a teenager. Who do you think you are? You hurt the warriors of the northern borderline. You should pay the price. Arrest them all. The man from the northern borderline calmed himself down and planned to arrest them first so that there would be no evidence. As long as they insisted that they were the ones who suffered losses, according to the Dongqing royal family's usual weak style, the northern borderline would not suffer losses. So what if he was the son of an important minister in the court? As long as he did not kick an iron plate, the royal family of Dongqing would not dare to offend him when the marriage was already set in stone. Therefore, the man from the northern borderline looked at Jiang Pengji and Feng Jin with a hint of murderous intent. It turned out that they did not kick an iron plate, but an iron wall. Wu Liba, who did you say you wanted to arrest? At that moment, Lu Shi's voice came from the crowd. The man from the northern borderline did not expect someone to be able to recognize his identity. He could not help but look in the direction of the voice. My son is right. This is Dongqing, not your northern borderline. If you don't want to come here without returning, then you better tuck your tail between your legs and behave. Otherwise, no matter how the other old farts try to protect you, I, Lu Zhongqing, will not let you walk out of the city gates of Shangjing. Feng Ren, who was a step behind, looked at his disheveled son with a gloomy face. He then looked at the arrogant people from the northern borderline and sneered coldly in his heart. He did not open his mouth to argue with the envoys from the northern borderline. Instead, he chose to ignore them and ordered someone to bring a medical officer over. Bandage your wounds. Later, you will enter the palace with me to meet the emperor. Feng Jin's face was pale and he nodded. Wu Liba was in a difficult position. His face turned the color of a pig's liver. He had originally come to embarrass others, but now he was humiliated instead. He was even thrown to the ground and stepped on twice by the other party. Next time, bring some brains with you when you go out. If you want to take others down a notch, you should first see if the other party is a cat or a tiger. Jiang Pengji stepped forward and clicked her tongue. She ignored his embarrassed expression. It's good that Huayu's arm is fine. If anything happens to it and causes it to be difficult to hold a pen in the future, Wu Liba, I don't want your lowly life as compensation. Be smart and break your arms as an apology. Wu Liba's face completely turned into ashes. He looked at Jiang Pengji with a murderous look. If it was anyone else, they would have been scared out of their wits, but she was Jiang Pengji. To put it bluntly, the number of people she had killed was more than the amount of rice he had eaten. This depends on whether the emperor of Dongqing agrees to it or not. After he finished speaking, Wu Liba left with his men. He did not care about the warriors from the northern borderline who were half dead on the ground. Looking at their backs as they left, Jiang Pengji suddenly slashed at the rockery at the side. Lu Shi sighed. Don't judge Wu Liba by his appearance as a brainless boor. In reality, he is a rare wise general in the northern borderline. Chapter 277. Jiang Pengji had long foreseen the outcome of Nanqing's defeat, but she did not expect that the news of them asking for reinforcements had only just reached Dongqing. Coincidentally, they bumped into the marriage team of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. Dongqing would be in trouble. Although Dongqing and Nanqing had conflicts, they were still considered part of Great Xia, while the 3 tribes of the north borderline and the 4 tribes of Nanman were considered outsiders. In layman's terms, Dongqing and Nanqing were 2 sons of the same father. Even if they were separated, their bones were still connected. However, The 3 tribes of the north borderline and the 4 tribes of Nanman were foreign enemies who coveted their family property. In order to protect the family property of their ancestors, the 2 countries had to temporarily put aside their grudges and join forces. If Nanxing was really defeated by the iron cavalry of the 4 factions of Nanman, Dongqing would face the danger of being attacked from both sides by the 3 tribes of the northern borderline and the 4 factions of Nanman. The annihilation of the country was just around the corner. Therefore, Dongqing had no choice but to lend Nanxing troops to Dongqing. Both parties were interdependent. However, if they borrowed troops, it would definitely affect the military strength of Dongqing's border defense. The military strength used to resist the northern borderline would also be affected. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline had been at war with Dongqing for many years. They had always won more than they lost. Dongqing was courting death by emphasizing culture and restraining military force. It was foreseeable that after Nanxing came to borrow troops, Dongqing's military strength in the northern borderline would be thinned. It was no wonder that the envoy from the northern borderline was so fearless. Lu Shi sighed and said, "The 3 tribes of the northern borderline have been coveting Dongqing for a long time. I only hope that you are clear-headed and don't let the wolf into the house. Marriage is not a permanent solution, but it seems that it is too late." Feng Ren looked at his son with pity. His heart ached when he saw his son's pale face. He sneered coldly when he heard Lu Shi sigh. He despised the man sitting on the throne. Although Feng Ren knew that he would not get any justice in the palace this time, he still wanted to let the emperor know that the Feng family was not a pushover. Feng Ren cupped his hands and apologized to Lu Shi. Then he left with his son, whose wound had just been treated. His face was as cold as ice. After experiencing such a thing, many people no longer had the leisure to soak in the spring. Suddenly, someone patted Jiang Pengji's shoulder. "I didn't expect you to be so skilled in martial arts." It made one want to shout out in satisfaction. "I don't like those bastards either. It's just that I can't beat them up like you. It is said that the warriors of the northern borderline are fearless of death, but from what I see now, it seems that they are not as powerful as you." She resisted the urge to subdue him and turned her head calmly. It turned out to be the young man who had tried to get close to her before. Jiang Pengji warned him expressionlessly, for the sake of the words, "grandson of AB*TCH. I don't like people patting my shoulder from behind. If you're a stranger, I'm afraid you won't be able to keep your arm." The other party was stunned, and he withdrew his hand as if he had been electrocuted. "I didn't expect you to be so vicious at such a young age." As they were talking, the group returned to the Rose Courtyard Sky Room 1. Separated by a corridor, Jiang Pengji noticed a tall and slender figure in white standing in the corridor. The man's ink-black hair draped over his shoulders, faintly revealing his pale, tightly pursed lips and a slight chin. Perhaps he heard the footsteps, but he turned around slightly. His indifferent gaze swept around and fixed on Jiang Pengji. Jiang Pengji had fought with someone, so her clothes were inevitably stained with blood. If she didn't look relaxed, people who didn't know would think that the blood was hers. However, Wei Ci was very clear that this woman was not the one who was at a disadvantage. The blood could only belong to someone else. Thinking of this, Wei Ci moved his gaze away calmly and asked the young man who was familiar with Jiang Pengji. "Xiaoyin, what's going on?" A group of boorish men who claimed to be envoys from the northern borderline were causing trouble in front. A servant from the Feng residence came to Lanting for help. Out of curiosity, I followed them to take a look. I didn't expect those people from the northern borderline to be so arrogant. They bully Dongqing. How hateful. The young man's voice was filled with resentment, but he immediately resumed his playfulness. "Zixiao, let me tell you, Master really took in a good student. She's really good at fighting." A servant from the Feng residence? Wei Ci frowned and glanced at Jiang Pengji, who looked normal. Wei Xiai had always known that she was good at fighting. Not to mention a few warriors from the northern borderline, if she had a spear, she could easily kill her way in and out of the enemy's formation more than 10 times. She could take the head of the enemy's general as easily as taking something out of her pocket. But, he sighed slightly in his heart. It was indeed different. He rarely saw this person show an expression other than indifference. If it was in the past, thinking of this, Wei Xiai firmly suppressed the thoughts in his heart and calmed his mind. Facing this woman, he needed to be 120% vigilant. Otherwise, if he was not careful, he would have nowhere to hide in front of her. He had experienced this a long time ago. Jiang Pengji explained, "Feng Jin is my good friend. He was bullied, so I naturally had to go over and support him. What's more, those boorish men from the northern borderline are really annoying. I gave them a light punishment, or else I would have nowhere to vent my anger." What a joke. Beating her partner was the same as beating her. Of course, she had to get back at them. You didn't just give them a light punishment just now. You made them lose their courage. To deal with the ambitious foreign tribes from the northern borderline, you should use such a forceful method. If you talk about propriety, righteousness, integrity, and trust with them, they will only think that you are afraid of them. Xiaofan placed both hands on Jiang Pengji's shoulders. With an expression of experience, he said warmly, "In the future, when we go to Langi Academy, I will protect you." Wei Xiai silently glanced at Lu Zheng's hands. His eyes gradually darkened. "I said, don't pat my shoulder from behind." Jiang Pengji repeated. "My name is Lu Zheng. Master gave me the courtesy name Xiaofan. Look, we know each other now. We are not considered strangers, right?" Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and said, "Up to you. If I dislocate your arm next time, don't ask me to take responsibility." After saying that, Jiang Pengji skillfully shook her shoulders and slid out like a mudfish. Lu Zheng found that the shoulder under his palm had become extremely soft and smooth. Before he could subconsciously grab it, she had already left his palm. He could only stare at his hands in a daze. Then he looked at Jiang Pengji's back and sighed. "You really have good skills." Wei Xiai looked at him coldly. His eyelids slightly narrowed as he said, "When martial arts practitioners reach a certain level, they will be highly vigilant of their surroundings. If an unfamiliar aura tries to approach them, it is extremely easy for them to unconsciously capture it. Xiaofan, be more careful." Lu Zheng was startled. He suddenly realized that Wei Xiai was saying that he was stupid. "Zixiao, why do you also read such indecent novels from the streets?" No matter how he looked at it, his words sounded like the standard of a wandering master in a novel from the streets. "If you don't believe me, try approaching her when she's taking a nap. But if her arm is crippled, I won't take responsibility." Wei Xiai knew that it was not a rumor from the streets. It was true. "Hey! Wei Zixiao, you never have good intentions. I won't be fooled." Chapter 278. After returning to the hot spring room, Wei Xiai asked the other students in detail to understand the whole story. He sighed and said, "Feng Huayu's fortune never comes in pairs, and misfortune never comes alone. He suffered for someone else for nothing. But it's fortunate that this is the case. Otherwise, tonight's incident would be difficult to resolve. Dongqing is already in a precarious situation. It can't withstand such a shock." Jiang Pengji listened at the side. She raised her eyebrows slightly and asked, "What do you mean?" Wei Xiai didn't want to answer. After all, he had some indescribable resistance to this person. He subconsciously didn't want to have too much contact with her. But after a slight hesitation, Wei Xiai recalled what Jiang Pengji whispered in his ear when she imprisoned his hands. He didn't want her to pay special attention to him. He could only let go of the grudge in his heart and truly treat her as a very ordinary person. Thus, Wuxia answered calmly, "If I'm not wrong, these warriors from the northern borderline are planning to cause trouble for the residents of the Count of Zhenbei." Lu Zheng, who was at the side, suddenly reacted. Yes, among the group of people just now, there was indeed a Lang Jun from the residence of the Count of Zhenbei. The descendants of the Count of Zhenbei have contributed a lot to Dongqing. They shed blood and shed blood. They were originally flourishing, but in order to guard the northern borderline, some of them died in battle, some died of illness. There aren't many seedlings left. Among the Langjuns today, the reclusive Crown Prince of Zhenbei was also present. The descendants of the Count of Zhenbei guarded the northern borderline and took the lives of many northern borderline warriors. Most of the descendants of the Count of Zhenbei died on the battlefield at the hands of the generals of the northern borderline. The two sides have long formed a deep hatred. It's not surprising that they have a conflict when they meet. The descendants of the Count of Zhenbei are few and far between, but they still hold a large number of troops. The emperor has been afraid of them for a long time and sees them as a thorn in his side. If anything happens to the crown prince, I'm afraid the three tribes of the northern borderline would probably wake up laughing even in their dreams. The emperor sitting high on the dragon throne might be angry on the surface, but he must be very happy in secret. I heard you say that there's a person called Wu Liba among the group of people causing trouble. He's one of the few wise generals in the three tribes of the northern borderline. He looks stupid and reckless, but he's actually very meticulous. Now that they were in the territory of Dongqing, no matter how arrogant they were, they would not dare to act so recklessly. However, if the target is the crown prince of the residence of Zhenbei Marquis, the emperor will be furious on the surface, but will secretly protect Wu Liba and his group. By doing so, he could not only satisfy the emperor's wishes, but he could also sow discord between the residents of Northern Marquis and the emperor, causing the two to completely turn against each other. The military power in the hands of the Count of Zhenbei was too great. How could the emperor not know the ambition of the three tribes of the northern borderline? However, he was even more afraid that the residents of Count Zhenbei would be overshadowed by their achievements. Lu Zheng felt a chill down his spine. Even though he had talked about the world situation with his classmates, he had never been as cold as he was now. The other point is also the reason why the three clans of the northern borderline are the most fearless. Nanqing's army was defeated like a landslide. Dongqing was bound to send reinforcements. At that time, the border of the northern borderline would be in danger. Now, I'm afraid the emperor is looking forward to the marriage even more. He hopes to temporarily stabilize the three tribes of the northern borderline by marriage, but he doesn't know that the northern borderline has been coveting Dongqing for many years. Why would they care about a weak marriage relationship? Jiang Pengji snorted coldly. What you mean by this is that the emperor may now favor the three tribes of the northern borderline and work hard to stabilize them with all kinds of generous conditions? It's not that it's possible, it's that they will definitely do so. Wuxia sighed softly. He also had feelings for the royal family of Dongqing, but he couldn't stand the fact that they were too good at courting death. The more disappointed he was with the royal family of Dongqing, the more he missed the person who made him suffer for half of his life. Putting aside how shocking it was for a woman to ascend to the throne, at the very least, she was able to stabilize the country, prevent the people from being humiliated, prevent chaos in the court, and prevent the people from being anxious and fearful. Thinking of this, the pain he had suffered seemed to be nothing. The power of the emperor is not bestowed by the deities of heaven and earth. It comes from the people and the people of the world. Therefore, the emperor is light, but the people are heavy. As an emperor, if he destroys his reputation through marriage, struggles to survive by ceding land, exploits the people through tribute, and humiliates the country through reparations, how can he have the face to sit on the throne? The emperor should guard the gates of the country, and the emperor should die for the country. Now that he could do it all over again, he hoped that he could truly assist her for once, as a strategist, and not, as someone that even he despised. Jiang Pengji felt a little depressed. She snorted. Oh, the group of people from the northern borderline have achieved their goal of testing the bottom line by creating trouble. Wu Liba's action seemed arrogant, but upon careful thought, there were many conspiracies and calculations involved. The emperor's final judgment was biased towards the northern borderline. Wu Liba's goal of testing the waters had been achieved, and he would be more fearless in the future. But Lu Langjun, you don't have to worry. As long as your father is still around, the emperor won't touch you easily. When he said this, Wei Si's expression was a little strange and conflicted, but he quickly restrained it. How could he not be conflicted? Lu Shi had clearly been personally. TSK, how could he become the county chief of Hu County? If Lu Shi had the ability, he wouldn't have ended up like that. Wei Si didn't know what went wrong, but he didn't intend to investigate further because there was no need. He was very clear that people would change. From the moment things changed, everything that he knew would be useless. The right path was to be down to earth. Jiang Pengji was not happy about what Wei Si said. Only the weak needed to be protected by the strong. She was safe because of Lu Shi, which meant that she was not strong enough. Thinking of this, a strange light flashed in her eyes. An impulse arose in her heart, but she forcefully suppressed it in the end. Jiang Pengji smiled coldly and said meaningfully, "Oh, it's best if he doesn't touch me. If he dared to touch her, he would make the emperor regret crawling out of his mother's womb." Wei Si was silent. Seeing Jiang Pengji reveal an expression that he was familiar with, he was shocked to find that his hands were secretly sweating. Wei Si forced himself to calm down. Just as he was about to stand up and leave, Jiang Pengji suddenly asked him, "Is Zixiao very clear about the situation in the court?" He was about to say that he knew a little, but the ignorant Lu Jing directly exposed him. "Lanting, you don't know about this. Come, let me tell you. Zixiao's policy and political commentaries have always been very exciting. He has a profound analysis of the world situation and always has his own views. Sitting at home, he has long been aware of the situation in the outside world. Even my master said that he is not inferior to Premier Jiang of the previous dynasty. It's a pity that he is stubborn. I don't know what's bothering him, but he still refuses to accept my master as his disciple." Lu Zheng had placed Wei Si on a pedestal and praised him with all his might, but in the end, he said. Fortunately, half a year ago, he went down the mountain and hit his head. He finally knocked the water out of his head and agreed to be my master's disciple. Jiang Pengji, Wei Si, I'll say it again, Lu Xiaoyin. You. Say. Who? Brain. Head. Enter. Water. Yes. Suddenly, Lu Zheng rubbed his arms. He was clearly in the hot spring, but his back felt a little chilly. Xiaoyin, I suddenly feel a little itchy. Come, let's have a game. Without any explanation, Wei Si pulled the very unwilling Lu Zheng away. Jiang Pengji looked at the bright moon hanging in the sky and suddenly curled her lips. She lowered her head to look at the card between her fingers. Chapter 279. Feng Ren and his son sat in the speeding carriage. The sound of the wheels was mixed with the bustling noise in the carriage, but it couldn't break the strange silence between the two of them. After a long time, Feng Ren sighed and said calmly, "Does your hand still hurt?" Feng Jin sat upright. His face was abnormally pale, and his lips were slightly blue. The wound on his right arm had been bandaged by the medical officer, but the blood had soaked through most of his sleeves and arms. It hadn't dried up yet, and the strong smell filled the entire carriage. He looked rather pathetic. "It doesn't hurt that much anymore." Feng Jin lowered his eyes and answered. He asked hesitantly, "Father, the Emperor." Feng Ren interrupted him and said, "I'm afraid the Emperor is determined to unite with the 3 tribes of the northern borderline by marriage to stabilize the war situation at the border. Even a child wouldn't bother to use such a naive scheme, but the Emperor can't help him after all." Feng Jin didn't miss a word that his father said. The more he listened, the more nervous he became, as if a small drum was beating intensely in his heart. Did his father mean that he was ready to give up the hopeless Dongqing royal family? "You were a little reckless today. If it weren't for Lu Zhongqing's strong martial arts, you wouldn't have just injured your arm." Feng Ren's voice was a little more pitiful and resentful. After all, it was his son who was injured, and the pain was in his father's heart. Feng Jin lowered his eyes and silently listened to Feng Ren's rebuke. He didn't like to stand out, but today he had a conflict with the warriors of the northern borderline and was even injured by them. Naturally, he had his reasons. If he went forward, he would at most be injured, but if the warriors of the northern borderline pointed their spears at the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei, someone might die. Everyone knew that there were hungry wolves in Dongqing. The Count of Zhenbei was the last stronghold of Dongqing in the north. If something happened to the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei, who knew what those people would do? How arrogant would the 3 tribes of the northern borderline be? Maybe it was because of the family tradition, Feng Jin and Feng Ren usually didn't care who was the emperor. However, Feng Jin was still young and hot-blooded. He could not watch what happened today become the fuse for the downfall of the Count of Zhenbei. When the time came, the 3 tribes of the northern borderline would no longer be able to stop them. They would be able to send their troops south and march straight into the hinterland of Dongqing, causing the people to be plunged into misery and suffering. Therefore, Feng Jin stopped the crown prince of Count Zhenbei and went forward to face the provocation of those warriors from the northern borderline. He was defeated and was injured. If he hadn't been quick-witted and asked Jiang Pengji for help, it would have been more than just an arm injury. Thinking of Jiang Pengji, Feng Jin's expression softened a little and he felt a little more warm. At this moment, he somewhat understood what it felt like for a ranger in a common story to be willing to risk his life for the sake of his brother. Feng Ren changed his tone and said somewhat angrily. "However, have you ever thought about what would happen if that brat's martial arts skills aren't good enough and he gets implicated because of you?" Feng Jin was speechless. He was about to say that Jiang Pengji's martial arts skills were excellent, but Feng Ren did not give him a chance to speak. "Forget it, I owe Lu Zhongqing a favor this time. I'll find a chance to repay him in the future." For a moment, the carriage returned to silence. Feng Ren closed his eyes and could not help but start to think about what to do next. The current royal family of Dongqing was like mud that couldn't be helped. In order to take back the power in the hands of the aristocratic families, that man made even more foolish moves. He secretly supported the influence of his relatives and condoned the power of the eunuchs. He tried to muddy the waters so that he could fish in troubled waters and reap the benefits. What was the result? The struggle between the aristocratic families, the collective group of eunuchs, and the increasingly powerful influence of the relatives became more and more intense. The current emperor had great ambitions, but he did not have the means to control his subordinates. It was originally just a problem of the aristocratic family's power, but now it had become a hidden danger that affected the entire court and the whole of Dongqing. The Feng family had been passed down for more than 1,000 years. What kind of storms and waves had they not seen? Dongqing was just like a big ship that was leaking and in danger of sinking at any time. Now, it was time to retreat bravely and temporarily lay dormant to wait for the general trend of the world. But after a while, Feng Ren already had a plan in his mind. Feng Jin, who was beside him, was still worried. The carriage went straight to Shangyang Palace. The towering palace was like a giant beast lying on the ground. Although it was late at night, the palace lights were not extinguished. If one looked down from above, the brightly lit Xiangyang Palace was like a brilliant pearl embedded on the ground. The emperor wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Every day, he would play with the palace maids and concubines. He was extremely luxurious. Occasionally, when he wanted to have an affair, he would either visit the officials' homes incognito, humiliate the officials' wives, or kidnap women and lock them in the summer palace. The officials in Shangjing were angry but dared not say anything. In the early years, Feng Ren still had expectations for the emperor. He dared to speak and be angry, but naturally, he was not liked by the emperor. If he was not the leader of the Feng family and the emperor did not dare to touch him, he would have lost his official position and his family would have suffered. Minister of the Secretariat, what's wrong with you today? At this time, His Majesty has already gone to bed. Feng Ren smiled coldly. His eyes seemed to be penetrating with cold knives. His tough attitude was completely different from his usual good guy image. Feng Ren waved his sleeves angrily. Gone to bed early? Assistant Lu, you can talk to a 3-year-old kid, but it's not enough to deal with me. You and I know what kind of person His Majesty is. If I don't see His Majesty today, I won't leave. Decadent sounds had already come out of the palace, and the air was filled with an extremely extravagant smell. Did he tell him that the emperor had already gone to bed? Did he really think that he, Feng Xianda, was a 3-year-old kid? Assistant Lu had lost his virginity since he was a child. His voice was extremely shrill, and his appearance was neither male nor female. However, he could climb to the position of Assistant Lu in the Shiraba of Xiangyang Palace and become a close eunuch trusted by the emperor. He was naturally good at observing people. He smiled awkwardly. Minister of the Secretariat entered the palace late at night. Logically speaking, should report as soon as possible. However, His Majesty has been working hard for the affairs of the northern borderline recently, and he often gets angry. It's also very difficult for me. Why don't Minister of the Secretariat secretly tell me that if the matter you entered the palace to report is really important, I'll report it for you even at the risk of being punished by His Majesty. Normally, Feng Ren would definitely be so angry that he would leave when Assistant Lu put him in such a difficult position. He didn't want to argue with a eunuch. But today, he answered with a cold smile, resign. Assistant Lu's face changed dramatically. He said, what happened? How did you make Minister of the Secretariat so angry? Resignation is not a trivial matter. Once it's said, it's hard to take it back. Why did you? Feng Ren said with a cold face, it seems that His Majesty is really asleep. I won't disturb him. I'll write to His Majesty tomorrow. Assistant Lu didn't dare to stop him. He quickly said that he would go in and report. No matter how stupid he was, he knew that Feng Ren's resignation at this time was tantamount to adding fuel to the fire. Feng Jin secretly looked at the luxurious and exquisite Xiangyang Palace, and then looked at the arrogant Assistant Lu. A chill spread in his heart. Feng Ren said coldly with a fake smile, then I'll have to trouble Assistant Lu. Chapter 280. Feng Ren came out of the palace with a cold expression. Huayu, let's go. Feng Jin secretly glanced at his father and then listened to the sounds of things being smashed and the terrified screams of the palace maids. After hesitating for a while, he decisively followed his father's footsteps. He was extremely disappointed in the emperor and had completely given up. As Feng Ren expected, the emperor only rewarded Feng Jin with a large amount of money and medicinal herbs. He didn't mention how to deal with the messengers from the northern borderline. He didn't even try to hide the fact that he was defending the people from the northern borderline. Even though Feng Ren threatened him with resignation, the other party was determined and even secretly felt a little happy. Although Feng Ren was the head of the Secretariat, he was still an official. No matter how insignificant he was still an official. If he took the initiative to resign, the emperor could install his confidant and gradually increase his voice in the court. He thought of Secretary Lu's reaction. When he heard that Feng Ren intended to resign, he hurriedly went to report, but the emperor was overjoyed. When he put the two reactions together, Feng Ren almost laughed. An emperor's foresight was not as far-sighted as a eunuch. If the Feng family continued to follow such an emperor, they would be doomed. It was a good strategy to escape as soon as possible. When it came to chess skills, even Ten Lu Jing could not beat Wei Ci, who was full of schemes. I don't want to play chess with you anymore. Every time I play, I feel like I'm punching cotton. I feel very aggrieved. Lu Jing saw that he had lost the upper hand on the chessboard, so he quickly admitted defeat. It would be self-torture to continue playing chess. He wanted to find Jiang Pengji for comfort, but when he turned around, he found that she had disappeared. Zixiao, did you see where Lanting went? Lu Jing asked casually. Wei Ci said, he left a quarter of an hour ago. I guess he went to bed. Lu Jing nodded and immediately reacted. He gritted his teeth and wanted to strangle the person in front of him. You were playing chess with me 15 minutes ago, and now you have the time to pay attention to others. Wei Ci was speechless. Jiang Pengji was watching them play, but she knew that Lu Jing would lose when she saw the chess. She suddenly lost the mood to continue watching. She did not obediently go to bed like Wei Ci had told her to. Instead, she changed into a set of light clothes and went to drink wine with Lu Shi. Yes, drinking with prostitutes, and bringing Lu Shi along. Lu Shi, what can I do? I'm desperate too. Lu Shi didn't even dare to touch his daughter's glass of wine as he watched her drink like it was water. What's bothering you? He asked. Jiang Pengji dismissed her attendants and asked Lu Shi, Father, did you mean it when you said you wanted to marry my sister to Wu Majun? Lu Shi furrowed his brows and replied, Of course it's true. As your father, I've also said that you don't need to settle the grudges of the previous generation. In that case, I have a presumptuous request. Jiang Pengji's eyes lit up, and there seemed to be a glimmer of light in them. What? Jiang Pengji said, I want to find a girl with outstanding looks to be my sister's dowry. I want her to marry Wu Majun. Nansheng was already in chaos. The four factions of Nanman had directed their troops towards Nansheng's capital city. Out of the 5 countries in the world, one was about to perish. She could not wait any longer. Lu Shi's current body would only be 13 years old in a few months. In a few years, no one knew what the situation would be like in the world. Jiang Pengji planned to start planning now, instead of waiting until then to passively enter the game. Lu Shi was a little dumbfounded. He understood that his daughter was probably going to use a honey trap to make the already chaotic situation even worse. At the same time, she would secretly gain some benefits. A honey trap and pillow talk could be considered a good idea, but Wu Majun was only an unfavored prince on the surface. Jiang Pengji only sneered coldly at this. Does the Dongqing royal family still have such a thing as moral integrity? They can humiliate their officials' wives, kill their brothers and snatch their sisters-in-law, and kill their parents. How can they lack a concubine who snatches their sons? Rather than directly sending the beauty to him, it's better to let him snatch her himself. That way, it won't arouse suspicion. Also, try to make this girl look similar to Wu Majun's mother, Wang Shi. Jiang Pengji tapped her fingers on the tea table and added. Lu Shi's hands trembled when he heard that. The teacup that he was holding suddenly fell on the table, spilling tea all over the table. His face became extremely ugly. After Jiang Pengji saw it, she revealed an expression that said, I knew it. What you said is not difficult. I'll send someone to look for her. Lu Shi tried hard to maintain a calm expression. He was afraid that he would reveal any unnecessary emotions. Jiang Pengji acted as if she did not see Lu Shi's loss of composure. She continued to leisurely drink her wine with a faint smile on her lips. Lu Shi, who was beside her, was anxious and fearful. As time went by, the psychological pressure that his daughter put on him increased. Spending the night in the red light district, enjoying a night of singing and dancing, it was indescribably carefree. When the sun hung high in the sky the next day, Jiang Pengji returned to the hot spring house with the smell of alcohol. "Where the hell did you come from?" Lu Zheng saw her and was about to greet her, but he was scared away by the various colors of rouge on her body. The rouge smelled good, but it could not withstand the strong smell of alcohol. The combination of the two was a kind of olfactory torture for people who were used to smelling all kinds of incense. Chongqing Alley. That's not a hell of a place. Jiang Pengji soaked her face with a wet towel. She looked much more sober. Lu Zheng was speechless. Even though it was his first time in Shangjing and his first time soaking in the hot spring, he knew what kind of place Chongqing Alley was. It was a gentle place for men and a red light district where all kinds of beauties gathered. The teenager in front of him was not even fully grown yet, right? The wine there is delicious and the music is not bad. If you like it, I'll bring you there later. Lu Zheng quickly agreed to Jiang Pengji's invitation. How? How can I accept that? But I heard that there are many talented women in Chongqing Alley who are full of knowledge. Many young and talented men will always have a poetry competition in order to win a beauty's smile. I really want to see it. Wei Ci was speechless. He glanced at Lu Zheng, who was slightly eager to try, and then looked at Jiang Pengji. He snorted coldly. Seeing Wei Ci walk past them, Lu Zheng said with a bitter face, "Zixiao has never liked to be close to women. He looks down on that kind of place. He heard our conversation just now. I hope he won't say anything in front of Master." "He won't say anything," Jiang Pengji said with certainty. Lu Zheng asked, "How do you know?" Jiang Pengji found it funny and answered, "Intuition." Wei Ci did not say anything, but Jiang Pengji and Lu Zheng could not go to Chongqing Alley because Master Yuanjing left Ji Shan with his students in the afternoon. Seeing that, Lu Shi felt that soaking in the hot spring was boring, so he took Jiang Pengji and hitched a ride with them. They went down the mountain together. When they arrived at the city gate, they were still talking and laughing when a piece of shocking news came. Chapter 281. Wait, why did something happen to the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei? Jiang Pengji sat in the carriage and watched the bullet screen in boredom to kill time. Occasionally, she chatted with the audience. Her sensitive ears heard the whispers of passers-by outside the carriage. She suddenly perked up and hurriedly lifted the curtain of the carriage, jumping out to inquire. This series of actions almost scared the people in the carriage and the coachman. The latter hurriedly pulled the reins and stopped the carriage. "Lanting, how can you be so reckless? What if you accidentally hurt yourself?" Lu Shi was so frightened by Jiang Pengji's action of jumping out of the carriage. When he came back to his senses, he found that his back was drenched in cold sweat. Jiang Pengji turned her head and said that she was fine. At the same time, she grabbed the commoner who was gossiping just now and repeated the previous question. Why did something happen to the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei? The commoner was so frightened that he almost forgot how to speak. He looked at Jiang Pengji's attire and knew that she was not an ordinary person. He could not help but secretly curse his bad luck. It was not easy to serve a noble person. If he accidentally angered her, it would be difficult to keep his head. With such a perturbed feeling, the commoner smiled at Jiang Pengji uneasily. His smile was very forced. After a long time, he squeezed out a sentence. This matter spread around last night. It said that the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei fought with someone for the title of courtesan. There was a conflict and a few people were killed. The crown prince was weak and could not withstand the stimulation. He He died on the belly of the courtesan. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Yuan Jing and the others and Lu Shi also recovered from Jiang Pengji's reckless jumping out of the carriage. They understood the reason for her loss of composure and their faces all turned cold. Wei Ci sighed and said, Feng Huayu's good intentions were wasted by the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei. In order to control the situation, Feng Jin knew that the people from the northern borderline wanted to find trouble with the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei. Instead, he confronted them. Not only was he beaten up, but his right arm was also injured. He did not have the chance to participate in the assessment that was about to begin and missed a great opportunity to rise rapidly. The crown prince of the residence of the northern marquis was unaware of the danger. Instead of obediently going to bed at night, he ran off to compete with others for the title of top beauty. Beside him, Lu Zheng glanced at Wei Ci, who was in the same carriage. There was a puzzled look in his eyes. He said strangely, from what Zixiao said, you're blaming the crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei for this matter. Could it be that there's nothing fishy about the northern borderline? Wei Ci smiled and said, you may not know this, but this crown prince of the Count of Zhenbei was originally the son of a concubine and was not favored. However, the bloodline of the Count of Zhenbei was declining. Most of the young men died on the battlefield, and the crown prince who had been established before died at a young age, not even leaving behind an heir. As a result, the position of the crown prince of the residence of Northern Marquis was given to the son of that concubine. It was impossible for a bastard son to be made a crown prince in an ordinary family. However, this bastard was already the only child, and the residents of Count Zhenbei had no choice. Not only that, this bastard son was congenitally deficient. He had some defects since he was born in his mother's womb, and he was prone to illness. The Count of Zhenbei regarded him as a fragile porcelain doll, and he did not even dare to speak loudly. They spoiled him to the extreme, and gradually raised him to be blindly arrogant and foppish. Perhaps there are traces of the northern borderline in this, but this crown prince is courting death. There's no doubt about that. If he was smarter, he would have known to behave himself when Feng Huayu helped him avoid the disaster. Why would he fight for the title of courtesan belle then? Wei Ci said with a cold expression. He did not care at all what kind of crisis the death of the crown prince would bring to Dongqing. On the other side, Jiang Pengji asked about the details in detail. The commoner did not know any of this, and he immediately put on a bitter face. Lang Jun, I'm just here to join in the fun. I heard about this from other people's idle chatter. How would I know what those big shots said and did? Even if you ask me, I can't answer. Jiang Pengji looked at the commoner and sighed in disappointment. She turned around and returned to the carriage. Lu Shi glanced at Jiang Pengji and said in a low voice, don't worry. When we arrive at the Feng residence, I'll send someone to inquire about it in detail. Since this matter has caused such a stir that even the commoners are talking about it, it must be quite a big deal. It shouldn't be difficult to find out. Jiang Pengji nodded, but she still looked a little absent-minded. Lu Shi and his son temporarily stayed at the Feng residence, while Master Yuanjing and his students stayed at another residence on the other side of Shangjing. The two groups of people did not go the same way. Once they entered the city, they naturally separated. Lu Shi asked about the place where Master Yuanjing and his people were staying. He politely said that he would bring his son to pay a formal visit to Master Yuanjing after the matter was settled. After all, he was his daughter's teacher in the future, and basic respect was still necessary. Master Yuanjing did not care about these customs. He said to Wei Ci, now that the situation is tense, Shangjing is in a state of panic. I don't know what the northern borderline bandits will do. Send County Chief Lu on my behalf so that I can be at ease. Wei Ci's expression did not change. He nodded and agreed, but he did not agree with it. As long as Lu Shi was with Lu Shi, whoever came to cause trouble would be courting death. Why would he need to escort them? They drove to the Feng residence in a low-key manner and did not encounter any accidents. Su Ke had been waiting at the door since he received news that Jiang Pengji was coming back. He saw the familiar carriage from afar and finally let out a long sigh of relief. He did not know why, but he felt that he could not let his Lang Jun out of his sight. Otherwise, she would cause trouble. However, when he went forward, the first person to get out of the carriage was an unfamiliar face. Wei Si was speechless. Su Ke looked puzzled, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. If Wei Si was not wearing a scholar's robe and was dressed as a man, he would have thought that he was a girl just by looking at his face. After Wei Si got out of the carriage, Jiang Pengji followed. Su Ke could still smell the faint fragrance of wine on her. Xiaoyu, many things happened last night for you to not go to Ji Shan. You did not go, and you missed a lot of good things. Su Ke looked like he had nothing left to live for. He knew that if he let his Lang Jun run around, he would definitely run into some messy things. Before he could calm down, he heard the sound of jade beads falling on a plate. It made his scalp tingle. Xiaoyu? Wei Si's eyes fell on Su Ke. He murmured softly with some doubts. His voice, which was neither too soft nor too loud, fell into the ears of others. It was like a bunch of feathers gently tickling the sensitive earlobes. It made people have goosebumps, and they could not help but blush. Well, Su Ke blushed. Jiang Pengji was speechless. She did not expect Su Ke to have a problem with his voice. Do you know me? Chapter 282. I don't know you. I just feel that the name sounds very familiar. It's as if I've known you for a long time, but I can't remember where I've heard it. Wei Si gave a perfect smile and then cupped his hands in the other before his chest to Lu Shi and his son. He said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, County Chief Lu and Lang Jun have safely arrived at the Feng residence. I have not disgraced my master's orders, so I will not disturb you any longer. I am afraid that my master will be waiting anxiously, so I will take my leave first. Lu Shi tried to persuade him to stay, but Wei Si used the excuse that it was important to report and left. Su Ke asked in private, "Is that your new friend?" Jiang Pengji secretly rolled her eyes. She did not think that Wei Si saw her as a friend. It was obvious that this man called Wei Si, for some unknown reason, was very repulsed by her. It was not considered hostile, but it was not friendly either. However, as long as it did not affect her safety, and Wei Si was unwilling to spill his secrets, she could not be bothered to investigate the root cause. We just met once. He was ordered by Master Yuanjing to send me and my father off. Master Yuanjing? Su Ke was surprised. Did his Lang Jun mean that he met the famous Master Yuanjing when he went to Ji Shan's hot spring last night? He was the idol of many young people in Dongqing, and Su Ke was no exception. Is Lang Jun Master Yuanjing's disciple? Su Ke asked with a competitive look in his eyes. Yes, Master Yuanjing's disciple. I have some secrets, but... Jiang Pengji smiled and said confidently, one can only be a thief for 1,000 days. How can one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? I want to see how long he can keep the secret in his stomach. Su Ke was confused. He didn't know what his Lang Jun meant. More importantly, why did Lang Jun describe him as a thief? On the other side, Wei Si was having a headache. Meeting Jiang Pengji yesterday was already outside of his plan. He did not expect to meet Su Ke today. What was even more horrifying was that Su Ke was actually by His Majesty's side at that moment. Did the sun rise from the west? Thinking of Su Xiaoyu, whom he had met before, and recalling the face he had just seen, Wei Si felt conflicted. He felt that there was something wrong with the way he woke up. When did Her Majesty and Lu Shi have such a good relationship? When did Her Majesty know Feng Jin at such a young age? Since when was Su Ku truly willing to serve His Majesty? In fact, it was not the way he woke up that had a problem. It was the Emperor who had a problem. Once he thought of her expression, mannerisms, and battle prowess that she was all too familiar with, Wei Ci silently suppressed this absurd thought. Wei Ci did not expect that the matter that gave him a headache was not over yet. As soon as he returned to the residence where the students of Langyi Academy were staying, he acutely noticed that the surrounding atmosphere was slightly stagnant. Looking around, not only did the students look unhappy, even Master Yuan Jing, who was always optimistic, looked cold. This scene made Wei Ci's heart tremble. He had a faint ominous premonition. "Master, I have sent County Chief Lu and his son safely to the Feng mansion." "Yes, I understand." Mr. Yuan Jing seemed to have aged a little. His lips, which were usually curled, were now pressed into a straight line. His eyes were filled with frost. "Master, did you encounter something difficult? Why do you look so distressed?" Wei Ci asked. Master Yuanjing restrained his expression, but the melancholy between his eyebrows was still eye-catching. "I'm fine. You can go and review your lessons. Don't go out easily these few days." After saying that, he stood up with the support of the table beside him. His footsteps were faintly frivolous, which made Wei Ci very worried. After Master Yuan Jing left, the suffocating silence in the room was finally broken. Wei Ci looked at Zuda. "Zuda, you have always been taking care of Master. Do you know why Master is like this?" Ever since Zuda entered Langyi Academy, he had volunteered to take care of the older Master Yuan Jing. Although this person was a little simple-minded and held a different philosophy from Wei Ci, Zuda was extremely respectful to Master Yuan. He followed him all the time and almost never left his side. Zuda saw that his classmates in the room were all looking at him. Suddenly, the pressure doubled. He could only bite the bullet and say, "This matter. Master strictly forbade me to say it." Wei Ci's expression turned cold. He flicked his sleeves and stood up. Since Zuda did not want to say it, he would find out from other sources. Most of the other students had the same reaction. Looking at the empty hall, Zuda could not help but grit his teeth in anger and vent his anger by pounding the ground. Damn the northern borderline. 2 flowers bloomed, one on each side. Jiang Pengji looked at Feng Jin, whose arm was tied up. His movement of raising his right hand was very stiff. He looked a little silly. "Who asked you to play the hero? You knew that you couldn't beat him. Why didn't you call for my help earlier?" Feng Jin smiled bitterly. His face was still a little pale, but it was much better than the night before. How can a man let a woman stand up for him? Jiang Pengji was secretly surprised. She said leisurely, "TSK, if that's the case, why did you let the servant call for me last night?" Feng Jin blinked his eyes. He did not care about his pride anymore. He supported his chin with one hand and looked at the stalemate on the chessboard. "Because I suddenly realized that Lanting cannot be judged by ordinary women. All the men in the world are inferior to her. It is not embarrassing to ask for help." Jiang Pengji was speechless. Looking at the chessboard, Feng Jin thought for a long time before putting down a chess piece. He said, "I thought that I would be able to avoid the disaster by helping the heir. I didn't expect that my good intentions would go to waste. He wouldn't have died if he didn't ask for it. This person is purely asking for it. I've just sent someone to inquire about the situation, and I've finally figured out what happened last night." Jiang Pengji's expression was cold. She was thinking about the chessboard in her mind, but she said, "That heir is really spoiled. His family doesn't give him the moon if he wants the stars. When has he ever suffered a setback outside?" He knew that the people who competed with him for the title of courtesan belle were from the northern borderline, but he did not back down after being reminded. Instead, he was fearless and even provoked them on purpose. He ordered his servants to beat them up. In the end, the heir of the Count of Jinbei won the beauty. He won a great victory. Several people who competed with him for the title of courtesan belle were beaten to death. Beating people to death was a small matter. Among those who were beaten to death, one of them had a high status in the northern borderline. That was a headache. Now the northern borderline was unwilling to let go of this matter. They wanted an explanation from Dongqing. According to Feng Jin's experience, the emperor was now biased towards the northern borderline. As long as it did not endanger his throne, they could consider any conditions. At that moment, Lu Shi brought back terrible news. They had found a scapegoat. Coincidentally, it was someone Jiang Pengji knew, which was beyond everyone's expectation. It turned out to be Han Yu, one of Master Yuanjing's disciples. How did Han Yu get involved in this matter? Although Jiang Pengji was smart, she still could not figure it out. It had nothing to do with Han Yu. Even if they wanted to find a scapegoat, they couldn't just randomly find one. Chapter 283. Han Yu was really unlucky. Yesterday, he managed to persuade Qing Jing to go to Ji Shan's hot spring with him, but they didn't know which hot spring Yuanjing and the others went to. They had no choice but to send someone to ask, so they wasted a lot of time and happened to run into the prince of the Count of Jinbei. In terms of blood relations, Han Yu was not related to the prince of the Count of Jinbei. But if they were to be calculative, the two of them were still related. The prince of the Count of Jinbei was the son of a concubine, so his status was slightly higher when he was invited to be the prince, so he was raised by his legal mother. Unfortunately, the legal mother was Han Yu's father's sister, so she was Han Yu's aunt. He knew that his aunt didn't like the son of a concubine, but she had to be nice to him for the sake of the Count of Jinbei. Han Yu thought about his aunt and was aware of the current situation in Dongqing. He was afraid that something bad would happen to him, so he tried to persuade him. The prince of the Count of Jinbei was arrogant and spoiled, but he still knew how to be respectful to Han Yu. However, it was useless to be respectful. Although he said that he wouldn't do anything stupid, his body still went to the brothel. Qing Jing snorted at that place and didn't go. Han Yu felt a little uneasy, but he couldn't stop the prince, so he followed him. He hoped that nothing bad would happen with him watching. Coincidentally, the courtesan queen was selling her virginity at a high price. The courtesan queen was so beautiful that the prince of the Count of Jinbei was attracted to her. He wanted to buy her virginity at a high price, but unfortunately, he ran into the spoiled nobles of the northern borderline, so the two sides got into a fight. The prince of the Count of Jinbei killed someone in the chaos because he had the advantage in numbers. Han Yu tried to stop him, but he was accidentally injured. It didn't matter if he was accidentally injured or not. What mattered was that the prince of the Count of Jinbei died in the belly of the courtesan queen, but the northern borderline didn't want to let it go. They insisted that it had something to do with Han Yu and dragged him into the mess, hoping that Dongqing would hand over Han Yu and give them an explanation. Jiang Pengji suddenly asked after listening to Lu Shi's story. "Father, did anyone expose Han Yu's identity last night? For example, did they say that he was Master Yuanjing's disciple?" Feng Jin listened carefully at the side. He was deep in thought. When Jiang Pengji asked, he suddenly understood. "Lanting, do you mean that the northern borderline is targeting Master Yuanjing by holding on to Han Yu?" Jiang Pengji nodded and said with certainty, "The crown prince of the Count of Jinbei died suddenly in such a manner. He died a dishonorable death. The northern borderline should be very satisfied." But they didn't stop. Instead, they pushed Han Yu to the teeth of the storm and made things difficult for him. Of course, they have other plans. Han Yu was not a sensitive person like the prince of the Count of Jinbei. Why would the northern borderline target him for no reason? Jiang Pengji's conjecture made sense. Lu Shi remembered something after being reminded by her. Mr. Yuanjing had a war of words with the barbarians of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. He argued for what was right and took back the 3 cities. The peace envoy sent by the northern borderline was called Wuxia. He was one of the few barbarians who liked to read. It was just that this person was obstinate and self-opinionated. He had no respect for anyone. After reading a few classics and historical collections, he felt that he was well versed in the culture of the Central Plains. He was the one who suggested that the royal court of the northern borderline negotiate with Dongqing. He offered 3 more cities, surrender, and annual tribute coins. He was not good at learning and was blindly arrogant. He gambled with Mr. Yuanjing and lost the 3 cities. He was so angry that he died. When Jiang Pengji heard the name Wu Lisir, she suddenly thought of the barbarian general Wu Liba whom she had met before. Lu Shi seemed to see the doubt in her eyes. He suddenly smiled. Wu Lisir is Wu Liba's uncle. Their tribe is called the Wise, in the northern borderline. They serve the royal court as strategists or generals. In the northern borderline, people eat raw meat and drink blood. They are backward and barbaric. They also advocate looting. Few people have brains. When Dongqing was founded, they didn't take them seriously. But the recent 2 generations of the royal family of the northern borderline are quite courageous. They gradually realized the importance of brains, so they focus on promoting the wise. I guess they still bear a grudge against Wu Lisir's death. Lu Shi had always looked down on the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. He also didn't think that they could rule the Central Plains because the ratio of muscles in their brains was too high. A tribe that only knew how to destroy civilization but didn't know how to preserve, create, or continue civilization was destined to be inferior. Feng Jin listened carefully. His eyebrows were tightly knitted. So, the northern borderline wants to make things difficult for Mr. Yuanjing? Lu Shi said, they probably want to show off. Wu Lisir was known as the wisest person in the northern borderline. There were even rumors that he was the reincarnation of Civil Star. He enjoyed a very high reputation in the northern borderline. If he wasn't so confident and determined that he would win, why would he be willing to bet the 3 cities with Mr. Yuanjing? In the end, Wu Lisir almost couldn't fight back. The northern borderline's face was swollen. It was a small matter that his face was swollen. Wu Lisir was so angry that he vomited blood on the spot. After he went back, he was depressed and died of anger within a few days. Mr. Yuanjing trampled on the faces of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. He was able to live peacefully in Langyi. It was a skill. Feng Jin said worriedly, so, Han Yu and Mr. Yuanjing. Won't they be in danger? The northern borderline obviously wanted to take this opportunity to get back at them. Even if they didn't kill Mr. Yuanjing, they would kill Han Yu or kill both of them to ruin their reputation. For scholars, reputation and dignity were far more important than their own lives. Not to mention Mr. Yuanjing, who was a famous teacher in the 9 prefectures. Compared to Feng Jin's worries, Jiang Pengji looked calm. She seemed to be enjoying a good show. She said, Huayu, do you think Mr. Yuanjing will be troubled by such a small thing? He has been famous for many years. Although she had only met Mr. Yuanjing a few times and he seemed to be just an ordinary middle-aged man with profound knowledge and a kind personality, Jiang Pengji had always been a good judge of character. Although Mr. Yuanjing's appearance was getting old, his eyes were still young and full of vitality. Feng Jin was speechless. Jiang Pengji said with certainty, I believe that Mr. will solve this problem beautifully. In less than 3 days. Why 3 days? Because the evaluation would start in 3 days, and Han Yu would also have to participate. Unless Feng Jin was so unlucky that he hurt his hand and couldn't write, Mr. Yuanjing would never let his beloved disciple miss such an important life event. If he couldn't even do this, it would be a waste of the high praise and affirmation of the people in the world. Jiang Pengji also felt that there was no need for her to study under such a teacher. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.